Hey guys, tonight we're plunging into the grim reality of medieval food, rotten bread, writhing maggots, and relentless hunger horrors. Imagine your morning porridge gritty with husk and your evening ale watered down to vinegar. Every meal a gamble on survival. If the idea of trading modern kitchen comforts for a porridge pot stirred over dung-fired embers doesn't sound unsettling enough, imagine waking to the whisper of hungry stomachs, the hiss of simmering gruel, and the faint, persistent tang of mold at the edge of every loaf. Over the next 2.5 hours, we'll wander alongside a peasant family, rising before sunrise to coax flavor from barley and rye, scavenging coarse greens at midday, and scraping together offal and brine-soaked fish by dusk. We'll trace their journey from monotonous meals to moments, surprisingly inventive, of pungent garlic and vinegar that hint at a world beyond bland necessity. Along the way, we'll meet spice-laden merchants risking bandit ambushes on the Silk Road, witness a king felled by a single rotten peach, uncover grim archaeological secrets of maggot-ridden storage jars, and contrast all this with sumptuous noble banquets and monastic dietary theories that foreshadow our modern food science. Prepare for a gentle immersion into daily hunger, muted resilience, and small victories, a narrative designed to soothe rather than startle. We'll acknowledge the gritty truths: adulterated bread, water-soaked ale, and disease lurking in every well. Yet throughout, you'll feel the steady rhythm of lives shaped by scarcity and ingenuity. So, dim your lights, settle in, and let your breath slow as you imagine the crackle of embers, the earthy scent of damp grain, and the quiet determination of medieval households. Now, draw in a long, steady breath, and join me for the first rays of dawn in a peasant's hut, where the day's first meal is both ritual and survival. Imagine yourself awake before dawn, the air cool and still, the world beyond your hut's single-shuttered window wrapped in grey half-light. Inside, the hearth's embers have long since faded to a dull glow, but here and there a brittle spark clings to blackened stones, waiting for the bellows of the morning. You rise from your straw-filled mattress, its tufts pressing into your back like silent questions, and pad across rough-planked floorboards, your bare feet accustomed to every gouge and knot. In the center of the room stands a battered iron pot, its sides etched with years of uneven heating. You gather handfuls of barley and rye grains from a split-wood bin, mottled kernels in shades of dun and ash, each fleck a reminder that these humble seeds are the bedrock of your family's sustenance. There is nothing elegant in their appearance, no gleam of polished pearl barley here, only the honest roughness of homegrown grain, hastily threshed and hastier still winnowed by hand. You fill the pot with water drawn last night from a rain-tinted cistern. The liquid is neither crystal clear nor alarmingly turbid, a middle ground of suspended silt and faintly earthy flavor. It carries with it the memory of rooftop gutters and willow frond filters, a subtle tang that in another time you might have found off-putting. Today it is a promise of warmth. What begins as chilly drops in iron will, once the fire is coaxed back to life, become the only comfort you will taste until dusk. Gently, as if waking a slumbering child, you arrange a small heap of kindling and pine cones beneath the pot. A handful of damp twigs gathered at the wood's edge yesterday crackles under your coaxing breath. Soon, the hearth breathes again, low orange tongues licking at the pot's base, a hush broken only by the sigh of flame. You add your grains, crunchy at first, reluctant to admit defeat to heat. Over minutes that feel both long and too brief, the grains surrender their stiffness. You stir with a carved wooden spatula, its handle smoothed by a dozen hands, first in slow circles, then in gentle figure eights, ensuring every kernel meets the water's embrace. Steam rises in thin plumes, carrying the scent of rain-soaked fields and distant smoke. Each swirl brings tiny froth rings that cling to the pot's rim, delicate as lace yet as perishable. Your spoon follows the patterns of steam, dipping into the depths to coax loose grains from the center to the edge, where they can soften uninterrupted. As the porridge thickens, ever so slightly, you pause, spoon in hand, to consider the simplicity of this alchemy. A few handfuls of grain and water transform, under patient heat, into substance enough to still the ache in your belly. It is an ancient magic practiced by every peasant for generations, and yet it never feels trivial. Today, like every day, it is a reminder that sustenance requires both toil and trust. Toil in tending the fields, trust in the unpredictable weather that yields these kernels of life. You ladle a small portion into a roughly hewn bowl, its surface pocked with the scars of time, and bring it to your lips. The porridge is tepid at first touch, tasting of earth and effort. With a texture that shifts between silky and grainy, you swallow and listen for the soft murmur of satisfaction in your own stomach. It is never sweet, never deeply flavoured, only the faintest aftertaste of something that might have been bread had the millstones been finer and the bakers more generous. Yet in these quiet moments you find small comforts. A stray pinch of crushed garlic, pressed into the porridge's surface, lends a subtle warmth. A drizzle of vinegar, harvested from last autumn's cider barrels, cuts through the monotony with a sharp kiss. These additions are humble rebellions against blandness, tender ways of reminding yourself that even the simplest meal can surprise. Outside, the sky lightens further. You set the empty bowl aside and stir the remaining porridge one last time before covering the pot to keep the heat. The morning ritual is complete. Grain and water have done their work, and you have done yours in coaxing them along. It is, in its way, a triumph, a quiet celebration of human ingenuity in the face of scarcity. As you step back, letting the heat of the fire chase away the final chill, you feel the day's first small victory. Your belly will wait a little longer before demanding more, and for now, that is enough. Imagine the loaf before you, a squat, heavy thing, its crust nearly blackened by the uneven heat of a wood-fired oven. You lift it from its cloth wrappings, coarse linen sacks stained with last week's meal, and feel its surprising weight, dense, unyielding, as though the baker compressed every ounce of flour and filler into this single stubborn mass. You break the crust with a practiced twist, listening to the muted crackle of brittle edges giving way. Inside, the crumb is nearly as dark as the crust, shot through with flecks of grey and tan. Beneath the grainy surface you spot telltale strands, fine sawdust that lends the bread a peculiar crispness, and tiny specks of acorn meal, bitter kernels roasted just enough to ward off rancidity, but not enough to mask their astringent bite. As you slice, the loaf resists your knife, demanding firm pressure to yield its innards. A few crumbs fall to the table, each one sharp-edged, as if carved from stone rather than baked from flour. You brush them aside and consider the craftsmanship, or perhaps the necessity that shaped this bread. There is no elegance here, no soft crumb yielding to a gentle press, no inviting aroma of yeasty warmth. Instead, you inhale the faint, smoky tinge of pine ash, a byproduct of the hearth fire, and the musty tang of stored grain long past its harvest. You bring a slice to your lips. The surface rasples against your teeth, its texture both hard and crumbly. As you chew, the sawdust component punctuates each bite with a woody grit that could double as tinder. The acorn bits catch at your tongue, their slight bitterness awakening sleepy taste buds. It is not unpleasant, exactly. More an exercise in enduring, a reminder of how little luxury can exist in daily fare. You swallow and marvel at how a single slice can feel like both sustenance and penance. Sometimes you catch a glimpse of pale green at the edge of the crust, microscopic colonies of mold edging their way toward the center. These rims are the baker's quiet confessions, proof that the flour has sat too long. Storage bins hugged moisture in the night, that life's simple rhythms can betray even the most basic needs. Yet you do not recall. Instead, you accept the mold as part of the loaf's character, like wrinkles on an aged face or dings on a well-worn shield. In this world, it is better to chew around the flecks than to risk a hollow stomach. Hidden within the dense crumb you might find the occasional grit of sand, or stray husk artifacts of the miller's grind, and the peasant's desperate thrift. Centuries ago, such impurities would have been removed with finer sieves. Here they remain as stubborn reminders that every meal carries the potential for surprise, pleasant or otherwise. You press your tongue against the roof of your mouth, detecting a whisper of vinegar, perhaps dripped from yesterday's preserved vegetables, offering a fleeting tang of relief. You tear another piece and spread a smear of thin butter, salted sparingly, saved from yesterday's churn over its surface. Slowly, the bread softens against the fat, and the hidden fillers lose some of their bite. It becomes almost palatable, a modest celebration of adaptation. You take a small sip of water to wash it down, cool, steady, unflavored, your simplest luxury. As the hearth's embers glow brighter, you use a rag to clean crumbs from your fingertips. You glance at the half-empty bowl on the table, aware that even this humble bread represents a small triumph. The baker's ingenuity in stretching scant resources, your own endurance in transforming necessity into ritual, the mold and sawdust, the bitter acorns, all become part of a story you share with every peasant who ever broke bread. In these quiet, deliberate moments, you sense a rhythm as constant as the turning seasons. Scarcity coaxing creativity, endurance meeting desperation, and the human will smoothing the rough edges of survival. You lean back, cradling the final crumb, and allow this small, imperfect meal to ground you in the slow promise of the morning. In the midst of scarcity, there is a profound comfort in knowing that tomorrow's loaf, however dense or dubious, will rise again. Imagine yourself sitting by the hearth's muted glow, the morning's porridge bowl scraped clean and the loaf's last generous slice now whittled to a few stubborn crumbs. Your hands tremble ever so slightly as you lift the bowl to your lips, coaxing out the tiny specks that cling like reluctant guests. Each grain you lick away brings a small victory and a renewed ache, as the emptiness beneath your ribs reminds you that hunger is never truly sated. In this hush between meals, your mind drifts toward what might have been. Spice-studded bread warm from a castle oven, its crust crackling under a buttered finger. Imagine cinnamon dust swirling in rich golden crumb, the aroma so heady it might banish the cold damp pressing against your hut's thin walls. You picture yourself breaking that loaf, sharing it among cheerful faces in a grand hall, though of course you have no place there. Your stomach grumbles in protest, a polite but persistent reminder that reality seldom matches daydreams. You cradle your empty bowl in both hands, feeling its cool ceramic like a foreign object. You let your fingertips trace the bowl's chipped rim, each imperfection a testament to countless morning meals just like this one. There is a certain comfort in that consistency, even if it means the same simple fare day after day. Your thoughts drift to tales you once overheard at market. A spice caravan arriving from distant lands, camels laden with peppercorns glowing like black pearls. You recall the merchant's hushed boasting of cinnamon, cloves and nutmeg, treasures so costly that only a noble's purse could bear their weight. You smile at the thought, a small, rueful curve of the lips. After all, would you know what to do with such extravagance, even if it were handed to you? The hut's walls creak as a stray breeze finds its way through the thatch, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and alder smoke. You close your eyes and let the cool air brush over your cheeks, imagining yourself in a sunlit stone courtyard, where warm loaves rest on linen cloths beside bubbling tureens. Birds might chirp overhead, and servants in crisp tunics would pass with trays of wine and honeyed cakes, an entirely foreign rhythm drifting through your slumbering mind. A pang of guilt flutters in your chest. How indulgent, how impractical to linger on luxury when the day demands work. But in these quiet moments, that guilt fades into appreciation. Daydreams are cheap sustenance, calories of the mind that cost nothing yet nourish hope in ways no rye loaf ever could. You let yourself savor the fantasy for a heartbeat longer, before gently placing the bowl aside. Your palms rest on your knees, dusted with crumbs you've long since lost track of. You flex your fingers, recalling the slow, familiar motions of kneading dough, the press of palms, the pliant response of flour and water, the slick sheen of honest sweat. You almost taste the dough beneath your fingertips, not laced with fillers or mold, but buoyant with promise. Yet every real loaf you've known carries its own blemishes, this one no less flawed than those before. As the hearth's embers brighten, you rise, smoothing the front of your woolen tunic. Hunger is a constant companion, but so too is resilience. You cradle the empty bowl to the shelf, its emptiness mirrored by the day ahead. A day of fields to tend, fires to stoke, and perhaps come midday, another bowl of watery pottage. You draw in a slow breath, centering yourself in the rhythm of necessary chores. And still, the dream lingers. When you close your eyes tonight, perhaps you'll awaken to a different reality. Castles, spice, and laughter bouncing off vaulted ceilings. For now, you carry that vision within you, a quiet spark to light your way through another long morning. In the space between real hunger and fanciful craving, you find a slender thread of comfort, enough to steady your heart until the next meal arrives. You settle back onto a low wooden bench, its surface worn smooth by countless midday meals, and push the still hot embers of the morning's fire toward one side of the hearth. The pot of lentil pottage, once thick and hearty in the chill of dawn, now simmers at the margin of the flames, its surface rippling in soft concentric circles. A few stray sparks drift upward, dissipating into pale sunlight that filters through the window slit. You reach for the day's stale bread, a small loaf whose crust has hardened to the color of autumn's last leaves. You break it into uneven cubes, sharp edges that yield a satisfying snap. Crumbs scattering across the rough planked table. In another life, this bread might have offered a gentle give under your teeth. Today it offers resistance, as if daring you to extract both sustenance and dignity from its bleached husk. With deliberate slowness, you scoop a ladle of lentil broth, thin, pale gold, flecked with lentil hulls, into a shared wooden bowl. The broth carries a subtle vegetal note, muted by the long simmer and the barest glimmer of salt. You drop in the bread cubes one by one, watching as they sink and bob, their rigid forms softening in the liquid's warmth. Soon, the bread begins to slough its crusty edges, the once sharp angles blurring into a shapeless mass that drifts atop the broth, like small islands submerged by the tide. You pause and stir gently, mindful not to stir too thoroughly. Part of the pleasure in this meal is watching the textures coalesce and separate in slow motion. Tender strands of bitter wild greens, shepherd's purse, nettle shoots, or perhaps a handful of dock leaves float among the bread, their deep green hue a daring flash against the soup's pale monotony. You caught them on a midday foraging run, sneaking through hedgerows where thorns tugged at your sleeves. Their flavor is bracing, almost astringent, and yet it breathes life into the broth, reminding you that even the simplest meal can surprise the senses. You lean forward, inhaling the steam's soft plume. The aroma's neither rich nor floral, but honest, earth and grain, with a faint hint of smoke from the hearth. There is a rhythmic calm in each breath, a momentary pause before the chaos of afternoon chores resumes. The bowl feels warm against your palms, and you let your fingertips graze its surface, tracing the faint grooves carved by carving knives long past. When you finally bring the spoon to your lips, the texture greets you in layered contrasts. Soft lentils melt into a puree against your tongue, giving way to bread fragments that unfold like damp sponges. The wild greens add a delicate bitterness, a counterpoint to the pottage's muted harmony. You chew slowly, each movement measured, unhurried, listening to the quiet chorus of slurps and occasional sighs around you. All at once, conversation stirs among your companions. A neighbor recounts a rumor of a traveling monk whose sack of spiced buns survived 3 days on the road. Another speaks of a local baker fined for selling bread so light it floated. Their voices blend into a low hum, punctuated by occasional laughter that rises and settles like birdsong at dawn. You offer a wry smile. Even amid scarcity, there is room for stories, small rebellions against the hunger that binds you together. You pause mid-bite to observe the way the sunlight drifts across the bowl's rim, leaving motes dancing in the air. You notice how the bread cubes, once rigid, now collapse into silky threads that swirl in the pot, a testament to time's softening touch. You dip your spoon again, savoring the mingled flavors and the sense of shared purpose that this communal meal brings. As the bowl empties, you feel a gentle warmth spread through your chest. The simple sustenance has filled more than your stomach. It has eased the edges of fatigue and sharpened your resolve for the afternoon's labors. You set the empty bowl aside, rubbing your fingertips along its rim to gather the last savory drops. The embers glow brighter now, as if pleased by the ritual you have honored. In these slow, deliberate moments, bread and broth, shared voices and quiet reflections, you find a fragile abundance, though the world beyond the hut may press in with demands and scarcity. Here at this hearth, you are sustained by both the pottage and the spirit of communal resilience, and as you rise to tend the fields once more, you carry with you the lingering comfort of midday scraps and whispered stories. Imagine the hearth's glow kicking up soft shadows across the low ceiling as you lean in toward the bubbling cauldron. Its sides are stained a deep charcoal from years of fires, each ring a silent chronicle of meals past. The broth inside shifts in gentle bulges, as though the pot itself were breathing, its surface rippling around floating bits of congealed fat. A fine plume of smoke curls upward, carrying a scent that mingles soot and simmered marrow aromas at once familiar and unsettling. You settle onto a bench just beyond the pot's heat, muffling the creak of aged wood beneath you. Around you, voices lower to conspiratorial tones. Neighborly murmurs about who's selling undersized bread, gossip of a pig stolen under cover of night, and whispered theories on why the village well's water tastes faintly of vinegar this week. Each snippet of conversation drifts through the air like motes of dust in sunlight, half heard and half remembered. With a long-handled ladle, you stir the contents of the cauldron, careful to keep the motion slow and deliberate. The spoon sweeps through broth thickened by hours of simmering, tiny bubbles gathering at the edges and popping in soft sighs. You pause mid-stir, wary of the telltale wriggle beneath a patch of floated fat. There, glinting like tiny ivory beads, a cluster of maggots bobs just below the surface. You lift them out with your spoon, 3 or 4 little wreathers squirming as though offended by their own discovery, and drop them back into the broth where they vanish into deeper shadows. You let out a breath you didn't realize you were holding. It's almost impressive. Nature's persistence, the way life reasserts itself even in scalding water. You can't help but marvel, in a wry sort of way, that these larvae have chosen exactly the wrong place to make their stand. Yet in this world, such surprises are part of the meal's character, a testament to storage bins, never quite sealed, to lard rendered and cooled in humid cellars, to human patience stretched as thin as the village's flour reserves. Your neighbour shifts on the bench and offers a soft chuckle at your wide-eyed expression. "Better than finding a rat's tail," she murmurs, voice hushed as though the wooden walls themselves might tattle. You nod, imagining worse possibilities. A whiskery intruder seeking refuge in the stew. The thought draws a quiet laugh between you, a small rebellion against grim reality. The pot continues its patient murmur, the broth's colour changing from muddy brown to something more translucent as fat melts away and grains loosen. You return the ladle to its resting notch in the hearth stonework, letting the metal cool until it no longer hisses when it touches the frame. The gentle crackle of fire accompanies renewed gossip, a traveller's tale of unsalted cheese, so pungent it cleared a room, a child's first taste of honey after a neighbour's whiny promise of just a drop. In this moment, you notice the way the light plays on the pot's curved belly, casting soft highlights that dance with each passing ember. The maggoty surprise, though unpleasant, fades beneath the comfort of shared ritual, the communal tending of fires, the measured stirring of broth, the low chorus of voices threading through the smoke. There is a quiet solidarity here, each person accepting imperfections in both food and life, bound together by the need to press on. You rise to fetch a ladleful for the midday meal, earthenware bowl in hand. The broth flows in a slender arc, sprinkling lentil gratings across the rim before pooling inside. The final bubble pops, and you catch a glimpse of one last maggot slinking away into shadow. You dip a spoonful toward your lips, taste buds alert for grit and bitterness, and find instead the warmth you sought, a gentle reassurance that however flawed, this sustenance will carry you through the afternoon. As you sit back down and take that first slow sip, the hushed gossip resumes around you, weaving ordinary stories through extraordinary circumstances. The pot's murmur softens to a lullaby of survival, and you feel the familiar rhythm of village life, imperfect, resilient, and ever moving forward beneath the whispers of hearthside murmurs and maggoty realities. You lift the communal wooden bowl to your lips, its rim worn smooth by countless hands before yours. A delicate curl of steam drifts from the surface, carrying the muted scent of simmered grains and marrow-soft fat. You bring the bowl closer, tilting it just enough to coax the warm broth toward your waiting mouth. Momentarily you pause. A tiny silhouette darts across the edge of the bowl, a fly, black and iridescent in the soft light of the hearth. It skims the oily film atop the stew, its spindly legs brushing against the congealed droplets. You watch, half amused and half exasperated, as it flits away only to return seconds later, as if drawn by an irresistible invitation. In this simple motion lies the day's quiet tension. Every swallow of this shared pottage carries an unseen risk. You recall whispers of dysentery coursing through neighbouring cottages, of stomachs twisted by tainted water and contaminated meals. A single errant droplet, laden with microscopic invaders, can unleash a torrent of fever and cramps, turning a midday reprieve into an agonizing ordeal. You breathe out, steadying your pulse. It is almost comical, an insect so small, commanding such authority over your appetite. Yet in this moment you respect its role as sentinel, a winged reminder that survival here is a series of calculated gambles. Each sip you take is a wager, the warmth soothes your belly's grumble, but the peril lingers in every swallow. Your companions sit in a loose semicircle around the hearth, each cradling their own bowls. Their eyes, like yours, drift between the pot's rising bubbles and the flitting flies. Occasionally a hand reaches out to brush away a buzzing intruder, gentle swats that scatter the pests without breaking the meal's quiet flow. No one speaks of the risk outright. To name it would be to give it power. Instead, you exchange knowing glances, a shared understanding that this is the price of daily sustenance. You tilt the bowl again, mindful of the rim's darkened patina, tracing the thin line where broth meets wood. You sip, tasting the blend of lentils and foraged roots, the faint tang of vinegar that brightens the flavor just enough to mask the underlying grit. The warmth spreads through your chest, a balm against the morning's chill and the midday shadows. Between sips, you let your gaze wander to the hearth's back wall, where a handful of drying herbs hang from a crooked nail. Sage and rosemary, bundled in fraying twine, promise medicinal respite should illness strike. Their dusty leaves send a murmur of protection through the room, a reminder that even here, under threat of disease, people reach for remedies beyond mere hope. A gentle cough echoes from across the bench. You glance at old Bryn, whose stooped shoulders tremble with each breath. He lifts his bowl, takes a careful sip, and swallows with suppressed effort. You offer a silent nod, acknowledging both his resilience and his vulnerability. The unspoken rule holds, dignity preserved through measured sips, eyes averted from each fly's audacious approach. As the bowl empties, you set it aside with deliberate slowness, each movement guided by the day's practiced rhythm. You brush residual droplets from the rim with the back of your hand, mindful not to smear the wood more than necessity dictates. Around you, the low chorus of contented hums and the occasional clink of spoon on bowl form a lullaby of survival, imperfect, cautious, yet undeniably human. You rise and stretch, the meal's warmth still lingering in your limbs. The flies, now sated for a moment, hover in lazy circles, awaiting the next opportunity. You straighten the bowl for the next comer, unconsciously wiping the place where your lips met wood. In this quiet act, you hold both hope and fear in balance. The hope that tomorrow's pottage will be just safe enough. The fear that even this small comfort could betray you. And as you step back into the afternoon's tasks, you carry with you the memory of each sip's gamble, an intimate reminder that in a world shaped by scarcity and risk, every meal is both gift and challenge. You return to the hearth as dusk settles beyond the window slit, its pale glow slipping behind the thatch roof. In your hands is a wooden jug of ale, once dark and frothy, now thinned by necessity. You settle onto a low bench, the wood cool against your calves, and tilt the jug to pour. A pale stream of ale drizzles into a chipped clay cup, its frothy crown barely registering before collapsing into a faint swirl of bubbles. The first whiff greets you like an old acquaintance, the sharp tang of fermented grain, tempered by the acrid bite of water. You bring the cup to your lips, pausing as you did at midday, aware that every sip carries both comfort and concession. The ale was once a sustenance in its own right, nutritious, heady, capable of banishing fatigue with its gentle inebriation. Tonight it is a diluted echo of itself, a whisper where there once was a promise of warmth. You draw in a slow breath, inhaling the scent of sour malt and damp wood. The jug's body still feels heavy in your grip, though you know it holds less weight than earlier in the week. The tavern keeper, or perhaps the village brewer, has added clear well water to stretch the supply. The result is a pale version of the heady brew you remember from better times. More vinegar than stout, more water than barley. Even so, you lift the cup and sip. The liquid is cool on your tongue, a fleeting shock after the day's labour. It tastes of tangy grains and filtered meadow dew, and beneath it, a whisper of yeast that struggles to surface. Each swallow numbs your taste buds in turn, dulling the sharp edge of hunger that's been your constant companion. The slight puckering sensation is not unpleasant, more like biting into a half-ripe apple that has just enough bite to remind you you're alive. As you sip, you notice the faint clink of spoons against bowls. As others in the cottage settle beside you, they too cradle their cups, ritualistically lifting and tilting, gauging the depth of sourness. No words are spoken. Such communion would break the spell of this quiet hour. Instead, you exchange shared glances, each of you acknowledging that this ale, however diluted, is a balm against the creeping night chill. You savor the sensation of liquid warmth trickling down your throat, spreading through your chest in slow waves. It's a comfort more profound than flavor, the knowledge that this small indulgence is a final shield before darkness fully descends. You lean back, allowing the cup to rest on your knee, and watch the smoke from the hearth drift in lazy spirals toward the rafters. Outside, twilight, deepens. Through the window you catch sight of fireflies in hesitant dance, tiny lanterns bobbing among the reeds. Inside, the ale's sour sweetness lingers on your tongue like a faded melody. You lift your hand to grasp the jug again, pouring a scant top-up, mindful of conserving every drop. The ale's cousin water sits in a separate pitcher, but tonight you will stick to this sour comfort. You pause to observe the cup's interior, where bubbles cling in concentric rings. Each ring marks a past gulp, a series of departures and returns to this simple pleasure. A single bubble drifts upward, popping at the surface with a whisper like distant thunder. You smile, a private acknowledgement that, though altered, the drink still fulfills its promise, a momentary reprieve from fatigue, a prelude to sleep. One final sip, and you set the cup aside, tracing its rim with a fingertip. The wood grain beneath your palm is familiar, grounding you in the present. You rest your head momentarily against the bench's back, eyes closed, listening to the quiet breath of the hut as it settles into night. Dusk rituals complete, you rise to check the simmering stew before retiring. But in this pause, cup empty, lips tingling, you feel the subtle shift from day to rest. The night's chill may press in on the windows, but inside you carry the warmth of watered-down ale, its sour comfort a gentle lullaby for your weary limbs. You return to the hearth as the last embers of the ale ritual smoulder into soft coals. The iron cauldron, its belly streaked with old soot, still cradles a stew whose ingredients tell a story of necessity and creativity. Beneath its lid lies the evening's bounty, offal from aged beasts' lungs, kidneys, perhaps a hunk of tripe that most would dismiss. Now slow cooked into submission, around these organ treasures swirl roots and berries foraged just beyond the cottage door. The crisp tang of wood sorrel, the faint sweetness of wild raspberries still dotted among fibrous stalks, and the earthy promise of parsnip cousins dug from sandy banks. You lift the lid, and a gentle plume of steam escapes, carrying the aroma of cooking marrow and herbal tang. There is no cloying sweetness here, nor the gilded scent of honeyed dishes. Instead, you are met with a fragrance grounded in earth and effort, an honest blend of iron-rich meat and woodland perfume. You inhale deeply, letting the steam fill your nostrils as you tilt your head back against the cool stone lintel, savoring that moment before appetite fully stirs. With a wooden ladle, you coax a portion of stew into an awaiting bowl. The liquid is a deep umber, flecked with fine strands of connective tissue and speckled with crushed berry skins. Roots, thick slices of turnip, and the long tendrils of wild parsnip float near the surface, their flesh softened by hours of simmer. You watch as a kernel of acorn-toasted bitterness drifts past, reminding you of last season's harvest. You settle onto a bench near the hearth, bowl cradled in both hands. The wood's warmth seeps into your palms, grounding you in this quiet moment. You lift a piece of offal to your lips, chewing first with curiosity, then with appreciation. The meat is tough but yielding, its flavor robust in the way only long-cooked organs can be, with a hint of game in its depth. You break a rib bone between your teeth, the slender stick cracking, and savor the soft marrow within, a hidden kernel of richness that feels like treasure in a world of meager allowances. Between bites, you glance around the small circle of companions. A neighbor deftly picks stray flecks of grit from her platter, while another carefully nibbles at a cluster of wild currants. Each sweet pop a sharp contrast to the hearty stew. The flicker of firelight plays on their faces, casting gentle highlights across furrowed brows and wind-rouged cheeks. You dip your spoon again, swirling the stew to collect a mixture of offal, root, and berry. The flavors intertwine, the slight metallic note of kidney tempered by the mellow sweetness of berry pulp, the creamy marrow softened by the soft snap of parsnip. You swallow deliberately, mindful of the balance between savoring and satisfying the gnawing hunger that lingers in your belly. At the edge of your peripheral vision, you spot a stray maggot wriggle free from a marrow bit, an unwelcome but not unheard of guest in such rustic fare. You pause, eyebrow arching in mild amusement, and flick it back into the pot with a practiced motion. After all, these creatures have mastered survival in far more dire circumstances. A hush settles for a few moments, broken only by the crackle of embers and the soft clink of spoon on bowl. Then, somewhere along the bench, a quiet chuckle arises, as someone recounts a childhood memory of mistaking parsley root for parsnip, only realizing the error when the bitter aftertaste set in. The group murmurs in recognition. Even here, amid offal and hedgerow finds, there is room for laughter. You lean back, letting the warmth of the stew seep into your core. Outside, darkness has fully claimed the sky, and you feel the day's labors loosen their grip on your muscles. The stew's simple pleasures, both gritty and generous, anchor you in the moment. With each swallow, you honor the animal's sacrifice, the forest's gift, and your own ingenuity in bringing them together. When the bowl is at last empty, you lift it to your lips once more, seeking the final drop of broth. You brush your thumbnail along the rim, gathering every last speck of flavor. The warmth of the stew lingers in your chest as you place the bowl aside and gaze into the glowing coals, feeling both content and contemplative. In the interplay of offal toughness and hedge bounty sweetness, you find a quiet testament to resilience, the promise that, even in scarcity, the world offers small marvels to those willing to taste them. You settle back against the rough-hewn bench, the last embers of the hearth's fire casting a gentle, flickering warmth across your shoulders. In your hand rests the wooden cup, now empty, save for a thin film of ale that has clung to its sides. You raise it to your lips one final time, tipping it so that the smallest lingering drop slides down your throat. It is a fleeting comfort, cool and visionary, that soothes the day's aches, just enough to blur the edges of wakefulness. Around you, the cottage has grown still. The communal bowl lies aside, its curves dusted with stray crumbs of offal and bits of foraged root. The cauldron's residue steams faintly in the hearth's residual warmth, a quiet reminder that tonight's sustenance was both humble and hard-won. You let your eyes trace the tenting smoke patterns rising in lazy spirals toward the low ceiling, each swirl like a whispered lullaby coaxing your mind away from the sharp lines of reality. Your limbs feel heavy, pleasantly weighted by the day's toils. You shift slightly, nestling deeper into your tunic's coarse wool, and permit yourself a small, wry smile. After the constant vigilance against hunger and cold, even this simple moment of rest feels like a small indulgence, an unspoken reward for surviving another cycle of scarcity. Your thoughts drift to imagined feasts in distant halls. Long tables strewn with golden loaves crumbed with saffron, platters of spiced venison glistening by candlelight, goblets of fragrant wine that coats the tongue like warm silk. You can almost taste the sweet honey buns passed around by laughing children, feel the resonance of harp strings carrying music through vaulted chambers. In that vision, every morsel is abundant, every breath scented with possibility. A hush falls as someone across the room settles his own cup onto the low table, an almost inaudible thud that signals the end of communal ritual. The neighbor's gentle snore begins, soft as distant waves lapping a shoreline. You listen to the rhythm, steady and unassuming, and let it guide your own breathing. Inhale, exhale, inhale. The cottage's shadows stretch and yawn, folding corners of the room into deeper gloom. You imagine the thatched roof overhead, golden reeds now, more muted in the night's hush, guarding you against the chill air beyond. A single moonbeam finds its way through the window slit, sketching a pale stripe across the floorboards, a quiet path to the heavens that seems both distant and reassuring. In this half-dreamed space you feel the weight of your eyelids beginning to sag. Each blink grows longer, as if the world itself were urging you to linger in stillness. You recall the ritual of dawn, grains dancing in a boiling pot, the sharp crack of crusty bread, the day's first flicker of hope in a pale bowl of porridge. Now, that same cyclical breath of life draws you inward, toward rest. Your mind drifts to the whispered tales spun at midday, stories of monks with secret herb gardens, merchants daring bandit roads, a king felled by a single peach. They seem far away now, echoes of a world that pulses beyond these walls. Here in the settling hush, those echoes merge into the steady rhythm of your own heart, quiet, patient, enduring. With one final slow breath, you nestle into the corner of the bench, tucking your arms around your knees. The memory of ale's sour tang, the stew's earthy richness, and the warmth of glowing embers coalesce into a gentle embrace. You think, perhaps tomorrow's bread will hold its own surprises, moldy edges to dodge, acorn bits to chew, but tonight, those concerns melt into the promise of rest. Your eyes close fully, and the cottage's murmur fades to a distant hum. Thoughts of imagined feasts linger like candied perfume at the fringes of sleep. You drift, unhurried, into a realm where scarcity softens into dream, and every breath becomes a quiet testament to survival's small rewards. In this fleeting reprieve, you find the soft edges of slumber beckoning, and you answer their call. You stand on the bustling docks of Venice before dawn, where the salt-kissed air mingles with the tang of fish and the sweet clatter of wooden crates. Lantern bearers weave between gondolas, their soft lamps bobbing like fireflies over dark water. The air vibrates with low chants from dock workers hauling spices, bags of peppercorns, cinnamon quills bundled like batons, and nutmeg kernels glinting like dull gems in oilcloth sacks. At the caravan's front, camels towering and patient shuffle in long, knotted rows. Their padded feet clip-clop on the planks, punctuating the dock's symphony of murmured prayers, creaking ropes and creaking joints. You run your hand along a camel's neck, feeling the coarse bristles beneath its calming breath. It exhales slowly, a plume of warm air scented faintly of dust and sweet hay, and swivels its eyes camel-cool, half-lidded, as though bored of the whole affair. Merchants in flowing robes adjust their turbans and secure leather belts heavy with coin pouches. You catch snippets of conversation, a barter over a camel's price, a boast of safe passage through Turkish borderlands, a hushed complaint about caravan rations. The traders exchange polite bows, but their eyes flicker with the restless calculation of men whose fortunes hinge on every safe mile. One fellow, swaggering in silken sleeves, jokes to his companion that if all goes well, he'll retire by next winter, an optimistic claim that in a caravan bound for 2 years of travel prompts a shared rueful grin. As the sun's first fingers pry apart the Adriatic mist, the caravan creaks into motion. Camels lurch forward, breaking the dock's lull into a steady rhythm of hoof and hum. The caravan's leader, a weathered man named Albo, with a scar bisecting his left cheek, raises a hand and the entourage follows. You feel the gentle sway beneath you like a boat leaving harbour, but this vessel bears no sails, only the slow perseverance of living freight. Soon you pass the last tendrils of Venetian fog and enter a landscape of rolling hills and olive groves. The scent of crushed olives and sun-baked grass drifts through the morning air. Every mile brings new hazards, the bristled words of local guides warning of highwaymen around the next bend, a caution repeated in the wary glances of mounted scouts circling the column's flanks. You make small jokes about robbers bumping your purse, only half laughing, the fear always there, lurking in the fine thread of every dusty robe. Days pass with measured monotony, dawns cold into morning's heat, lunch of hard bread and goat cheese, midday rest under thorny acacia, evening prayers at a makeshift camp of straw mats and low fires. Then comes the desert edge, a shape-shifting sea of dunes, the horizon rippling in heat haze. The moment you cross sandstone tracks, the temperature spikes, the wind picks up grit, hurling fine grains against your face like 1,000 tiny slaps. Breath comes in shallow sips, each inhale tastes of scorch and grit. You press on, heart thumping with the desert's quiet menace. At night, temperatures plunge, and you huddle in heavy cloaks, ears attuned to the caravan's soft murmur. Camels shifting, merchants whispering laments of water's scarcity. Luckiest among you keep a flask of precious well water for emergencies, sipping only when throats constrict into sandpaper. Bandits remain a constant shadow. You catch glimpses of furtive riders perched atop dunes, their silhouettes like fallen flags in the moonlight. Scouts ferry back warnings, their voices hushed. They come at dawn, or they strike from the west. Each alert sends a hush through the camp, like a cold wind though crowded tents. Leather harnesses glow beneath lanterns as guards mount and prepare for confrontation. You brush a stray grain from your sleeve and remind yourself that every risk is measured in peppercorns, tiny black spheres that can fetch a fortune, and in lives scratched out by a single arrow or a single misstep in swirling sands. Through scorching days and star-spangled nights, you cling to a modest grace. If the spice reaches its next market, the caravan's trials will be worth the wealth it brings, and the world beyond these perils will seem all the sweeter for having tasted its dangers. And so, you walk on, step by measured step, in a slow rhythm of hope and caution, journeying ever deeper into lands where bandits and sandstorms lie in wait, and where a single falter can change a man's fate, measured in peppercorns and the frail promise of safe return. You cradle a small leather pouch in your palm, its surface worn supple by countless exchanges. Inside lie peppercorns, black spheres no larger than peas, each one a hard-won treasure. You roll them between your fingers, feeling their rough texture and earthy weight. In an age where a peasant labors dawn to dusk for a few bushels of grain, this handful of pepper represents half a year's wage, a silent emblem of both rarity and desire. You close your hand around the pouch, feeling the pepper shift like distant echoes of crowded bazaars and desert winds. Each kernel embarked on a journey of mountains and markets, starved of water and pummeled by sandstorms before finding its way here. To taste even one would be to swallow a story of danger and devotion, of caravans weighed down by hopes and hazards alike. Beside the pepper lies a slender wafer of cinnamon bark, its surface mottled with ribbons of burnt umber and russet. You lift it to your nose, inhaling a warm, sweet depth, like autumn's first fire glowing in a hearth, but restrained, as though measured out by careful hands. It smells of distant groves where cinnamon trees unfurl glossy leaves under monsoon skies, worlds away from the thatched roof through which a single shaft of sunlight fights its way. You place the cinnamon wafer against your tongue, the powdery surface dissolving into a fleeting clarity of flavor. It pricks your senses awake with a whisper of wood smoke and spice, a hint of vanilla sweetness clinging at the edges. In that moment you're transported to a grand hall, where noble diners lean forward, blades curious and forks poised. Yet you're also acutely aware of the price. A coin here, a coin gone there, until the pouch's contents cost as much as a year's rent on your own humble hut. As you tuck the pouch back into your belt, you recall the toll stations that line the route out of Venice. Each stop demands a portion of cargo, peppercorns weighed against iron scales, cinnamon bark sliced from official bundles. You imagine the toll collector's lean frame, leaning over the scales, jaw set in businesslike determination, fingers tapping out the precise amount due. A slip here, a miscount there, and the caravan's profits could vanish like morning mist. Then there are bribes, small, discreet gestures of coin or silk handed under tables to ensure safe passage through contested territories. You picture a shady innkeeper slipping a copper under a wooden beam, or a caravan guard accepting a single kernel tucked into his palm, more precious than silver. These hush payments keep bandits at bay, or at least persuade them to pass without burning wagons or slitting throats. In this world, bribery is not an act of shame, but a survival tactic, a tribute to uncertainty. You rub your thumb along the pouch's worn leather, and let a wry smile touch your lips. To think that the simple act of seasoning a meal hinges on so many human dramas: toll keepers, bandits, heat-withered camels, and caravan guards, whose loyalty can be bought with a single ducat. Each grain of pepper and sliver of cinnamon carries the weight of countless negotiations and near-miss disasters. You push back a wisp of hair, and glance around your modest hut. A mortar and pestle rests on a crooked shelf, its surface pitted from years of grinding grain and herbs. You lift a solitary peppercorn, place it in the mortar, and coax it down with gentle taps of the pestle. Each crush releases a burst of warmth, pepper's signature sting, ringed by that cinnamon's mellow glow. The resulting dust, scant as it is, feels like a revolution in your hands. You sprinkle the spice into a bowl of thin porridge, watching the black specks drift across the pale surface. The aroma rises, unexpected in its potency, stirring a quiet excitement at the edge of your senses. It is a small rebellion against monotony, a gesture as intimate as a whispered secret. And yet, as you close the mortar's lid, you remember the ledger's tally. How many grains remain, how many days they must last. The price of flavor is not counted in taste alone, but in the measure of risk, endurance, and economy. You tuck the mortar away, letting the hut's shadows settle once more, carrying within you the gentle irony that something as simple as spice can cost so dearly and still be worth every precious kernel. You step across the polished marble threshold of the palace kitchen and feel the cool stone echo beneath your boots, a far cry from the uneven flagstones of the village hearth. Here every surface gleams, vast countertops of ivory-hued marble, high-arched ceilings draped in frescoes, and walls hung with polished copper cauldrons. The gentle drone of mortar and pestle resonates through the hall, each tap releasing a cloud of cinnamon-scented dust that drifts like incense in the morning light. At a long marble slab, a cook in a clean linen smock pounds cinnamon quills into fine powder. His movements are deliberate and unhurried, a tap-tap-tap that rings softly, almost musically, against the stone. You can see wisps of spice curl upward, clinging to the air with a sweetness so vivid it seems to tint the very light around it. A noble attendant pauses nearby, inhaling deeply, eyes closed in appreciation. as though breathing in a rare perfume, rather than a humble bark, once carried on a camel caravan. Along another counter, peppercorns tumble under the bruise of a brass grinder, each crushed sphere sending bursts of warm heat across the room. The grinder's smooth wheel turns in a steady rhythm, unlike the jerky motions of the village mortar you've known, each full rotation yielding a fine, fragrant dust. You find yourself smiling at the gentle absurdity peasants like you once traversed deserts and toll stations for months, only to see these spices handled here with such casual reverence. Rows of copper pans hang from overhead racks, catching glints of morning sun. Beneath them, simmering pots brim with sauces tinted saffron gold, their surface rippling like molten honey. A chef dips a ladle, tastes and nods, satisfied that just the right pinch of cinnamon has been added. Nearby, a noble woman in velvet embroidered with gold leaf steals a taste, her lips curving in a quiet sigh of delight. You almost laugh at the notion that this small bite, once enough to spark riots in the village market, now passes between high-born tongues as effortlessly as water. You wander deeper into the kitchen's heart, where crates of spices line shelves carved into the marble walls. Jars of preserved fruits, glistening with crystallized sugar, stand beside sacks of foreign grains. The air carries a tapestry of aromas, cloves' smoky warmth, nutmeg's gentle musk, and a teasing undercurrent of vinegar from pickled lemons. It is a sensory tapestry far richer than any rustic pottage could ever achieve. In a corner, the young apprentice huddles over a mortar, far smaller than the grand slabs, and practices grinding cardamom seeds. He frowns in concentration, lips pursed, as if measuring both spice and skill in each stroke. You catch his eye and offer a nod, an unspoken camaraderie between those who wield mortar and pestle, no matter their station. He grins back, brushing cinnamon dust from his sleeve, and returns to his task. The head chef, a portly man with a neatly trimmed beard, notices your presence and beckons you forward. He offers a sprinkle of freshly ground pepper on a sliver of roast pork, its crackling skin still warm. You accept, bringing it to your lips. The flavor blooms across your tongue, a swift heat that blooms mid-bite, followed by the lingering sweetness of cinnamon and the gentle tang of vinegar. For a heartbeat, you are suspended between two worlds, one of scarcity and one of abundance. You place the morsel on a porcelain plate, and the chef smiles, satisfied at having shared this small marvel. As you step back toward the entrance, the marble's cool whisper beneath your feet seems to seal the memory of these aromas. Spices once measured by handfuls carried over dunes, now treated as commonplace as fresh bread. Crossing back into the corridor's dimmer light, you carry with you the echo of that constant tapping, the sight of cinnamon snow drifting in shafts of sunlight, and the warmth of pepper's embrace. In your mind, the scents swirl together, reminders of perilous journeys and gilded courts, of hunger and celebration, woven into an enduring tapestry of flavor that shapes lives on the edge of fortune and folly. You stand in the castle's sunlit courtyard, as a cart laden with Gascon peaches rumbles to a halt. Each fruit is a soft orb of pale gold, their downy skins dusted faintly with the day's first light. The air around you warms with the promise of summer's bounty, an aroma redolent of honeyed orchards and dewy mornings. Courtiers gather, voices hushed in anticipation, as servants gently unload wooden crates, their slatted sides rattling with the weight of hundreds of plump peaches destined for the royal table. Yet beneath the promise of sweetness lies a secret few suspect, hidden rot, concealed until it is almost too late. As a courtier lifts a peach from its crate, the skin gives slightly under her fingers, yielding a hollow-sounding thump. To the untrained hand, this is merely ripeness. To the wary eye, the faint depression around the stem hints at sunken flesh, awaiting decay. Still, the peach, glowing with sunlit allure, passes from hand to hand, each person eager to glimpse the rare delight. You watch as the master of the fruit cellar inspects each peach, his practiced gaze tracing micro-tears where flies might have slipped in, tiny pinpricks that could herald spoilage. He taps one gently against a wooden board, a dull echo replies, and his lips tighten. Next, he pinches the stem, sniffing for a sour note. In most cases, this method saves the court from a moldy bite, yet today, one unlucky peach flees scrutiny, a fruit whose rancid core has quietly claimed its pride. That evening, in the great hall, the royal table is set with silver platters piled high, with peaches laid in concentric circles. Peaches as bright as autumn sunsets, Tapestries of crimson and gold hang on the walls, their threads gleaming in torchlight. The assembly is grand, nobles draped in velvet, the bishop in his robes of blue and silver, and the king himself, seated on his carved oak throne. Servants move with deliberate grace, offering bowls of chilled wine and delicate forks for these foreign fruits. King John lifts a peach, its skin warm from hours on the table. He brings it to his lips with a practiced smile, revealing pearly teeth that glint in the flickering light. A single bite, and the courtyard's promise shifts to courtly peril. Beneath the downy skin, his teeth sink into flesh tinged, not with sun-warm nectar, but with the sour tang of spoilage. The king's brow furrows, and for an instant the great hall trembles in silence. He offers the peach to a nearby knight, whose own expression falters as the flesh stains the silver fork with dull brown juice. The bishop coughs softly, overtaken by the abrupt shift in mood. Rumours spread in the hush. A rotten peach, knowingly served or accidentally slipped past the eaters of the realm. Whispers gather like storm clouds around the throne. Within hours, the king is ill. The febrile flush warms his cheeks. The tremor in his limbs betrays his royal stature, and the court's atmosphere turns from celebration to anxious vigil. Physicians arrive carrying phials of vinegar and cups of sage tea, each offering measured comfort. Yet, the poisoned fruit's rancid spores have already begun their unseen work, and he grows weaker as the night deepens. By dawn, King John's robust frame has withered beneath layers of silk sheets. Courtiers move with hushed dread, faces drawn in torches' orange glow. The rancid heart of a single peach, a solitary, spoiled gift from a distant orchard, has proven more powerful than armies or alliances. In the weeks that follow, the realm unravels in solemn remembrance. Ballads recount the king's final bite. Chroniclers lament the fickle fortune of a monarch felled by simple fruit, and peasants in distant villages shake their heads in wonder. How fragile power seems when measured against nature's quiet rot. Today, you stand once more in the empty great hall, the air still tinged with faint perfume of peaches long since removed. The crates are gone, the platters, silver polished, but the memory of Gascon peaches lingers, sweet promise and hidden peril entwined in a single, fatal moment. In that echo, you sense a timeless lesson. Even the grandest tables cannot escape the capriciousness of nature, and a crown's weight is no shield against something as humble and as dangerous as a single spoiled peach. You step into the vaulted chamber of the great hall, where torchlight flickers against cold stone walls, and shadows dance like silent supplicants. The air is heavy with the mingled scents of incense, cool marble, and something sharper vinegar, pungent and stubborn, lingering in every breath. Beneath your feet, tapestries muffle your footsteps, but elsewhere the hall resounds with hushed urgency. The clink of glass phials, the soft rustle of silk gowns, and distant prayers that rise and fall like a gentle wave. At the heart of the hall, the royal bedchamber has been converted into a makeshift infirmary. A long oak table holds the instruments of court physicians, copper bowls bright as dawn, mortar and pestle stained with dried pink petals of crushed roses, and vials of whatever vinegar could be spared from the feast's remains. You approach a physician in a dark velvet robe, his face framed by a neatly trimmed beard damp with tension. He lifts a glass phial, eyes narrowing at its contents. A bracing cordial of wine vinegar, infused with ground rue and pennyroyal leaves, believed to draw out corruption from the body. He uncorks the vial with a practiced twist, and the strong tang of vinegar unspools into the air. A noble attendant brings a silver spoon and a small cup. The physician ladles a measure of the sour tonic into the cup, adding a drop of honey to soften its bite. You watch as the king's hand, pale beneath fine linen, clasps the cup, fingers trembling as they lift it to his lips. He sips and the sharp liquid courses down his throat, a brief flash that reddens his cheeks before he lowers the cup, like a player finishing a challenging piece of music. Nearby, another physician crouches beside a shallow basin of warm water. He retrieves a leech, its slick body twining around his gloved finger with a life of its own. The leech's slender form, glossy as jet, reminds you of a ribbon given in jest, yet here it serves a more somber purpose. The physician places it against the king's wrist, where skin meets silk under the cuff. The leech anchors itself, leaving only the soft click of glass jars and the king's measured breath to fill the silence. You sense the leech's slow feast, a gradual tug at royal blood, the vessel's life unwinding drop by drop. It is a peculiar solace, nature humbling power. A small creature doing work that even the finest blade could not. A courtier nearby clears his throat, remarking quietly that if ever there were a time for vermin bribery laws, one might start here. The physician offers a half smile at the side of his lips, acknowledging the irony without breaking the hall's hushed formality. From a raised dais, a group of clerics chant prayers in Gregorian tone, their voices ricocheting off arches and bouncing back as soft echoes. These liturgical murmurs rise and fall around the king's bed, weaving through the scent of vinegar with strands of incense smoke. Every repetition, Kyrie eleison, Sanctus, 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 seems to fortify the chamber's fragile hope, even as each utterance reminds you that faith and science stand side by side in this realm. The physician with the leech lifts his gaze, checking the creature's engorged curves. He notes the slow pulse in the basin as the leech's meal ends, and gently detaches it with a dab of salt. The leech recoils at the salt's sting, curling into itself before being placed back into its jar, a peculiar companion to bottles of laudanum and wormwood poultices. You shudder slightly at the sight, then remind yourself that in this desperate hour, every remedy, however odd, is a thread of hope. A nurse offers the king a cup of rosewater, its fragrance light as a whispered promise. The king sips, eyes half closed, and you note the faint tremor easing from his hand. The combined efforts of vinegar's acid draw and the leech's gentle drain, along with prayers echoing like distant rain, have granted him a moment's respite from fever's grip. You step back toward the hall's entrance, carrying the echo of practiced incantations and the sharp tang of remedies in your lungs. The stone walls seem to hold their breath along with the court, awaiting the next dawn's verdict. In this blend of ritual and medicine, of humble creatures and fervent faith, you glimpse the lengths to which even the most powerful must go when confronted with nature's quiet, relentless resolve. You wake on a chill morning, October 18, 1216, to find the castle hushed beneath a silver mist. Frost crystals fringe the arrow slits, and each breath releases a small cloud that drifts upward, dissolving against the grey sky. Inside the great hall, torches gutter softly, their golden tongues licking at banners now draped in solemn black. The air carries a muted stillness, as though the stones themselves hold their breath in respect. At the foot of the grand dais lies the king's empty bed, crisp linen folded back to reveal only the faintest impression of a body that once filled its breadth. A single cedarwood coffin stands nearby, its surface carved with shallow reliefs of lions and fleurs de lis. You approach, noting the hush of footsteps on polished marble, and the distant clop of hooves in the courtyard as armoured knights arrive to pay homage to absence rather than presence. In the antechamber, barons cluster in small knots of muted conversation. Their leather jerkins creak as they shift weight, uncertain whether to grieve or to whisper of succession. When King John's spirit slipped away, a slow exhalation rather than a sudden crack, the realm was left with young Prince Henry at 8 years old, and a question heavy as a siege tower, who now wields the sceptre. One portly baron adjusts his chain of office, glancing at the empty throne with an awkward nod, as though about to sit, but unsure which etiquette applies to a wooden seat, unclaimed by flesh. He clears his throat. "Well, I suppose we ought to convene," he begins, tone polite yet edged with impatience. A leaner peer offers a dry chuckle. "Indeed, no point gathering for tea when the kettle's gone cold." Outside, banners bearing the Red Cross of England flutter limply in the breeze. Here and there, distant church bells toll in sequence, first mournful, then urgent, calling the realm's leaders to council. There is no monarch to receive them, only a vacant platform, and the echo of footsteps that once paced its expanse. In the castle's courtyard, a small detachment of knights, formerly sworn to John, await their orders with restless horses. Their breaths steam in the morning air, and the horses' flanks are slick with early frost. They shift, snuffling, as though they sense the kingdom's unease. A young squire, new to the weight of metal armor, fumbles with his helm, muttering that he never expected to serve under so uncertain a regent. His companion offers a reassuring grin, though neither can fully hide the tremor in his voice. Back in the hall, the baron's murmurs swell into debates over the regency council. Some press for immediate swearing of fealty to the boy prince, others argue for a more measured approach, mindful that hasty oaths could unravel like a hastily mended tunic. One elderly lord leaning on a carved staff sighs and remarks that, Even the best-laid rules are no match for hungry men with swords. The group chuckles softly, the humour slender yet genuine, a flicker of light in a room weighed by uncertainty. Beyond these corridors, in towns and villages, news travels by weary messengers. Some peasants pause in fields of stubbled barley, hands on their hoes, to listen for the faint drums of rebellion. Rumours swirl that certain baronial factions already moved to seize strategic castles, to fill the power vacuum with banners of their own making. In the quiet of dawn, the countryside seems poised on a knife edge, peace preserved by tradition, but fragile as a frozen pond's surface. As the council gathers at midday, you imagine the massive oak doors swinging open to admit anxious faces. Each baron steps forward, offering steel-gloved hand to empty air where the king's clasp once lay. The act feels ceremonial yet hollow, a dialogue with absence, a promise made to a realm in suspense. By twilight, torches council-side flare to life, outlining the chamber in wavering amber. Decisions emerge, an interim regency, oaths to uphold the kingdom's laws, and solemn vows to protect the young prince. Outside, banners are raised and lowered, alliances forged in hushed tones. The machinery of governance, brittle as ice underfoot, begins its slow turning once more. And so, on this autumn day, the kingdom stands bereft yet resolute. The monarch's final breath has given way to the stir of new authority. In the hush of marble halls and the frost-edged dawn, you sense both fragility and endurance, a realm unmade by a single spoiled peach, and remade in the silent rise of a child's inheritance. In that quiet passing of power, the future yawns wide, uncertain, and inviting, as the baronial rebellions spark in the vacuum of a fallen crown. You wake before first light, the cloister still wrapped in pre-dawn hush. Stone corridors lie in silence, broken only by the distant toll of the vesper bell, each chime a gentle summons that stirs the monastery from its slumber. You pull on your hooded robe, its coarse wool familiar against your skin, and slip into the cool air of the bakehouse, where torches gutter against flagstone walls. A low, arched doorway leads into the kitchen's heart, long tables of worn oak, shelving lined with earthenware jars, and at its centre, an immense brick oven whose maw yawns with residual heat. Monks in simple robes move with quiet purpose, their bare feet soundless on the stone floor. Each carries a linen sack of flour, the cloth rustling softly as they tip generous palmfuls onto a raised wooden bench. They work in pairs. One measures by touch, sifting flour through fingers pressed together, while another carries wooden buckets of water drawn from the abbey's well, pouring in measured streams until the mound of flour offers the perfect resistance. You join the circle, feeling the cool weight of flour settle in your hands. The grains sift through your fingers like tiny pebbles, dusting the air with a pale mist that drifts in the torchlight. A fellow monk murmurs a short prayer of gratitude for the grain, verses learned in childhood, now woven into this ritual. He bends to mix the flour and water, kneading the stiff dough with calm, methodical strokes. Each fold, each press, transforms the dry powder into a pliant mass, an alchemy of patience and muscle. Above you, the roof timbers creak as warmth from the oven seeps outward, chasing away the morning's chill. The fire within crackles with beechwood logs, a steady roar punctuated by soft pops as sap pockets burst and send amber sparks dancing toward the chimney. You pause, inhaling the mingled scents of smoke and budding yeast, aromas that fill the belly with more than hunger hope. Around the room, other monks work in silent harmony. One shovels coals deeper into the oven's heart, ensuring the floor radiates steady heat. Another gathers wooden peels, flat paddles used to slide loaves inside, and lines them with fresh linen to catch dough as it rises. The interplay of shadow and light falls across their faces, highlighting serene concentration and the faint sheen of sweat at throats and foreheads. Beneath the chanting of a morning hymn, soft voices rising from the chapel beyond, you shape the dough into loaves. Your palms stretch and round each mound, coaxing out air pockets, smoothing rough seams. You set them on oiled boards, leaving just enough space for each to breathe and expand. A gentle vibration hums through the room as the monks continue their work, a lullaby of community and purpose. As the oven's door opens, you catch the rush of heat, an embrace that warms your cheeks. One by one, loaves slide onto the blazing floor, their pale dough soon blistering into golden crusts. You close the door, and the kitchen holds its breath, the crackle of the fire now underscored by the promise of fresh bread. You step back, wiping flour from your brow with a linen cloth. The bell tolls again, marking the hour. In a few moments, these loaves will be escorted to the abbey gates, where waiting villagers clutch wooden bowls. The bread you have helped bake will be salvation in their hands, tokens of the monastery's grace, but also sparks of tension with local bakers whose livelihoods hinge on scarce grain. For now, you return to the dough bench, readying the next round. The fire hums, the flour drifts, and the bread, born of hushed prayers, shared labor, and crackling beechwood rises steadily in the ornate silence of the monastic dawn. In this sacred routine, generosity and ritual intertwine, each loaf a quiet testament to cloistered charity and the unspoken weight of kindness in a hungry world. You step toward the abbey's heavy oak gates, just as dawn's glow spills across the courtyard, turning dew-laden cobblestones into a field of molten glass. A narrow sliver of mist still lingers among the arches, weaving between the stone columns like a silent visitor. Beyond the gates, villagers gather in a loose semicircle, their wooden bowls held close to their chests, bowls rounded and worn, each one bearing scars of past suppers and shattered hopes. The earliest among them press forward timidly, robes and tunics patched in places, shoulders stooped from labor and life's quiet burdens. They stand in hushed reverence, heads bowed, and recite the opening prayers in unison. Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, our daily bread. Grant us this day. Their voices rise and fall like the turning of pages, a collective heartbeat that pulses through the gate's iron bars. Inside, monks in hooded habits move with deliberate grace, each carrying a wooden platter piled with just-baked loaves, simple rounds of pale crust and soft crumb. Their boots echo on flagstones, a measured gait that speaks of intention and care. You watch one monk extend a loaf through the gate, offering sustenance with a solemn nod. The recipient lifts her bowl in gratitude, palms pressed together as if in prayer, and the monk lowers a knife to slice thin wedges. The knife makes a soft schlick as it slices the crust, each cut precise and even, as though performed on a stage for an audience of need. A small wedge, still steaming, drops into the bowl, and the monk replaces the loaf on the platter before moving to the next. You notice the hush of satisfaction in the villagers' breath as they receive their portion, never more than modest, never less than enough to still the fierce edge of hunger. A stout woman in a threadbare cloak steps forward, her bowl chipped at the rim. She murmurs her prayer, and the monk offers a thick slice of bread. As she accepts it, her bent posture straightens. If only for a moment, she turns to her neighbor and whispers, "Today's crust is crisp as a new moon," and the neighbor manages a ghost of a smile, the faintest rebellion of light in a somber dawn. The line moves steadily, each exchange conducted with the same ritual care. You can't help but notice the rhythmic dance, prayer, offering, slice, thanks. It reminds you of the stoking of the abbey fires, steady, necessary, and unwavering. A breeze stirs, lifting the scent of fresh bread and mingling it with the faint perfume of lavender that grows behind the abbey walls. The aroma drifts over the crowd, drawing a few murmured compliments. "Smells like hope," someone says softly, and a ripple of quiet laughter follows, subtle humor that eases the hunger of body and spirit alike. You step forward to observe a young boy, perhaps 10 winters old, clutching a bowl nearly as big as his torso. He looks up at the monk with wide eyes and offers his prayer in a whisper. The monk pauses, inclining his head kindly, and gently presses an extra sliver of bread into the boy's hand, an unspoken grace. The boy lifts the crust to his lips and bites with deliberate slowness, as though afraid the taste might vanish too quickly. Beyond the gate, the abbey's courtyard remains a sacred enclave. Distant bells toll for the morning office, their resonance weaving through the arches. Each bell seems to mark another loaf distributed, another act of kindness performed. You imagine the local bakers watching from their doorways, some with approval, others with thinly veiled resentment, their own livelihoods shadowed by these charitable rituals. Yet today, in this quiet hour, forgiveness seems within reach as fresh bread unites rather than divides. When the last monk's platter stands empty, he closes the gate with a gentle push, the iron latch clicking in finality. The villagers linger, sharing their loaves beneath soft light that now warms the stone. They tear off chunks, passing pieces to one another, voices shifting from prayers to gentle conversation. The morning's hush gives way to a gentle murmur of gratitude and community, a living testament to cloistered generosity. You step back, letting the scene settle into your memory. The bowed heads, the crisp slices, the solemn chants, and the fleeting smiles. In each moment of distribution, you witness bread transcending mere sustenance, becoming both salvation and social spa. And as you turn away from the gates, the echo of prayers and the rustle of robes lingers, an enduring lullaby of kindness in a world teetering between scarcity and hope. You leave the abbey gates behind and make your way toward the nearby market square, where the first rays of sun gild the stall awnings in soft gold. The scent of fresh bread still lingers on your clothes, a reminder of the morning's charity. But here, among crowded stalls and clattering cartwheels, that same aroma provokes a different reaction. Thin-lipped frowns and furtive glances from the local bakers and millers who watch abbey loaves pass without price. The market's wooden stalls creak under the weight of goods, sacks of barley, reels of hardened cheese, bundles of leeks tied in neat sheaves. Amid this bustle, a line of tradesmen clusters near a stall draped in burlap, where a portly baker, Master Fawley, counts coins with a measured sigh. His flour-dusted hands tighten around each copper piece as though the metal burns. You notice the deep crease between his brows and the way his jaw ticks with unspoken frustration. Nearby, his apprentice arranges loaves in a neat pyramid, each crust the exact shade of burnished honey. Yet, at the abbey gates this morning, half a dozen peasants carried away free bread, loaves indistinguishable from these, save for the price tag. It is a gesture of charity, yes, but one that casts a shadow over honest trade. You glance at Fawley as he glances back, eyes smouldering with a mixture of resentment and resignation. A miller's wagon rolls by, its creaky wheels sending clouds of pale dust into the air. The miller's wife, apron tied tight around her waist, shakes her head as she brushes flour from her skirts. "Abbey bread takes our customers," she mutters to a neighbour, voice edged with fatigue. "They line up for charity, yet come to us for cakes and pies, claiming they have no coin after abbey handouts." Her words hang in the square like the dust, palpable and persistent. In a quiet corner, two burly farmers debate the fairness of it all. One gestures toward the abbey's distant towers, voice low and rueful. "Let them feed the poor," he says, "but let them not starve the rest of us by undercutting the grindstones." His companion nods, folding his arms across a thick tunic, and adds with a dry chuckle, "Next they'll have fish for free too, and I might as well sell my pigs for beans." The market's melody, vendors calling prices, children chasing a stray hen, the clip-clop of horses takes on a sharper edge, as whispers of unrest drift in. Some merchants speak of petitioning the abbot, requesting that charity hours be limited to once a fortnight. Others hint at occupying the gatehouse in protest, a spectacle of banners and placards bearing slogans like "Fair Trade for All" and "Charity at Our Cost." Though these are murmurs, you sense their tension could ignite into open confrontation at any moment. Amid this brewing disquiet, you notice a solitary monk crossing the square, his robe catching the morning light. He carries a loaf under his arm and pauses before Master Fawley's stall. Fawley squares his shoulders, preparing for reproach, but the monk simply lifts the bread and sets it gently beside a basket of fresh rolls. He inclines his head in a brief blessing and moves on, an act of quiet dignity that diffuses the moment's sharp edges. Fawley's apprentice glances at the donated loaf, then at his master, and to your surprise, offers a small nod of thanks. It is as if that single gesture of unearned generosity transcends wounded pride, reminding tradesmen that charity need not demean honest labour. The square exhales, tension easing into reluctant camaraderie. You wander past stalls of apples and salted fish, noting how the market's pulse steadies. Farmers fold their arms less defensively. Millers lean back against wagons without grimacing. The day's commerce resumes, each barter and bargain infused with a new understanding. Generosity and enterprise can coexist if met with respect and humility. As you make your way toward the edge of town, the abbey's silhouette recedes against a pale sky. Behind you, the market hums with renewed rhythm. Tradesmen nod to each other, customers clutch coins and loaves alike, and the memory of gateside charity settles into the square's living fabric. In this delicate balance between free bread and earned wages, you glimpse the human capacity to navigate both need and dignity, forging a path where cloistered compassion and market fairness might one day walk hand in hand. You find yourself crouched beside a shallow trench, the morning light soft and diffuse on the exposed earth. Around you, the sterile hush of the archaeological site contrasts sharply with the noisy bustle of village life just beyond the wooden palisades. In front of you lie fragments of coarse pottery, curved shards mottled with soil, each edged by a thin film of residue older than any living memory. Gently you pick up a shard about the size of your palm. Its surface is pitted, rough to the touch, a pale brown flecked with darker specks. You hold it up to the light and see barley phytoliths, tiny silica skeletons of grain husks, interlaced with lentil husks, their shapes preserved like fossilized lace. These plant remnants cling to the clay, invisible to the naked eye until coaxed into view by microscopes and chemical baths. Nearby, a colleague swabs a shard with a diluted solution of sodium hydroxide, releasing a fine plume of steam and the faintest hint of mustiness. Under magnification, microscopic spores, likely aspergillus or penicillium, reveal themselves as delicate branching filaments. You imagine these molds colonizing yesterday's porridge, then today's crust, their silent networks weaving through storage jars like ghostly gardeners tending to their own lush hidden forests. A small cluster of insect casings rests in a petri dish. Empty pupal cases from grain weevils and tiny larval cuticles from Cytophilus granarius. You lift them with a fine brush, their shapes so fragile you half expect them to dissipate at a puff of breath. Yet here they are, stubborn survivors of centuries, testaments to food's precarious journey from field to larder. You can almost hear their whispered tale of thriving in dark, humid granaries, proof that even the humblest vessels could become microcosms of life and decay. As you catalogue these finds, you recall the peasant kitchens, a single pot serving porridge by dawn, stew at dusk, grain stored in earthen jars pressed against wooden walls that never quite kept the chill or the vermin at bay. You trace a finger along a looped pattern where the jar's maker once carved a simple decorative band. Beneath that flourish, you see uneven ridges, evidence of hurried work, of a craftsman mindful that a broken jar meant starvation or barter lost. Your colleague labels another shard for chemical analysis. A drop of ethanol brings forth a faint sheen on the surface, a whisper of ancient fats rich in cholesterol, perhaps remnants of offal stew or marrow-laced broth. The lab will later identify fatty acids pointing to pig or bovine, even hinting at the occasional luxury of dairy when milk was more plentiful. For now, you note the interplay of residue, starchy hulls intermingled with lipid traces, a culinary snapshot of necessity and ingenuity. The trenches are silent, save for the distant clink of trowels and the occasional call of a crow overhead. In the hush, you feel the weight of discovery. These fragments, mute though they seem, speak volumes. They tell of scarcities managed with resilience, of mold tolerated rather than loathed, of maggots stirred back into simmering pots because nothing must go to waste. Their narratives unfold not in heroic epics, but in granular details, phytoliths and husks, spores and casings, that map the daily realities of medieval sustenance. You allow yourself a small, wry smile at the thought of archaeologists centuries hence, examining our own discarded coffee cups and clinging coffee grounds, marveling at our civilization's obsessions and excesses. For now, though, you carefully bag each shard, labeling it with the trench number and depth. The pieces will go to the lab, where microscopes and spectrometers will decode their secrets, revealing the long-vanished kitchens, larders, and firesides of the past. As you stand and brush dirt from your knees, you glance at the array of jars waiting to be lifted. Each one, chipped and stained, is a vessel of memory and survival. And though their original owners never imagined their toughest legacies preserved beneath layers of time, you know that these silent artifacts will speak their truths, of scarcity embraced and sustenance protected, of life teeming in the margins, and of the enduring human will to thrive, even when every crumb counts. You crouch beneath a makeshift canopy of weathered tarpaulin, the afternoon light softened into a muted glow across the excavation trench. At your feet lie shards of once sturdy clay jars, tumbled fragments of the village granary. As you brush away a final layer of dust, a tiny echo of movement catches your eye. A glossy beetle shell, its iridescent wing case shimmering with faint copper tones. You collect the fragment with a gentle fingertip, marveling at its improbably fine texture. Centuries ago, this shell sheltered a tiny grain weevil, its life spent tunneling through barley kernels in the quiet dark. Now, All that remains is this delicate exoskeleton, more resilient than the grain it consumed. You smile at the irony. Even in scarcity, vermin find a way to prosper. Beside the beetle shell, you spot a cluster of fly pupae cases, pale and translucent against the soil. They're no larger than a sunflower seed, their smooth curves nearly perfect. You imagine adult flies skirting the granary beams, laying eggs in the nooks where grain spilled, each larva finding its niche in the dusty feast. In those hidden hours, the granary must have echoed with soft scrabbling and the faint rustle of husks rattling, nature's own soundtrack to a peasant's storage failure. A colleague kneels to your left, gently lifting a larger shard still pocked with tiny holes. "Termite damage," he observes, voice low and steady. "They're not picky about wood or clay if hunger drives them." You nod, sharing his wry amusement at the industriousness of insects, world-renowned for their diligence yet universally reviled in human storerooms. The trench's ambient hush is broken only by the soft scrape of trowels and the distant call of a crow. You imagine those medieval peasants stacking grain by the thousands of kernels into these jars, carefully corking them with wax or linen, believing their provisions safe from spoilage. Instead, darkness and humidity proved irresistible invitations for every crawling creature in search of a meal. You press a shard against your cheek to feel its cool surface, then turn it to catch the sun's angle. Inside, tiny granules of muddied starch cling to crevices, as though the jar still cradles yesterday's porridge. Mixed among the starch are the remnants of insect activity, fine powder of pulverized beetle legs, and faint traces of fly silk from pupal casings. Chemical tests will later reveal chitin fragments, yet here in your hand they are simply curious souvenirs of nature's silent siege. Leaning back, you survey the row of jars waiting to be bagged. Each bears its own history of breach, gaping holes where insects bored their way in, rims darkened with mold and moisture, surfaces streaked by grains spilled in panic. You picture the startled cries of villagers discovering their winter stores riddled with holes, the heap of husks and hushed complaints beneath shuttered doors. In response, they likely fortified their pantries, but even reinforced chests can't hold back determined larvae. A gentle breeze stirs the tarp above, bringing with it the scent of damp earth and blossoming clover from beyond the dig site. It feels almost too pleasant, given the gritty stories these pottery fragments tell. You brush soil from your gloves, noting how the field's living tapestry of plants and insects continues much as it did 8 centuries ago. Beaches sway where granaries once stood. Ants trace invisible highways along the trench's edges. You stand and stretch, the weight of your findings settling into thoughtful calm. These insect infestations and storage failures, though dire for medieval households, reveal something enduring about life's tenacity. Even in environments engineered for preservation, the smallest creatures find portals to abundance. In that insight lies both caution and wonder, the peasant's daily struggle, not just against hunger, but against nature's relentless appetite. Pocketing the beetle shell and fly casing for careful cataloguing, you offer them a private salute. After all, their legacy endures, silent testaments to the grit and grime that underpinned medieval nourishment. And as you step back to the next jar, you carry with you the hushed echo of tiny legs and whispered failures, reminders that every grain stored, every jar sealed, was part of a fragile dance between human hope and nature's cunning. You settle beside the trench's edge as the afternoon light softens into gold, and your gaze drifts over the spread of reconstructed nutritional data laid out on parchment. Each column of numbers, calories from barley, protein from peas, fats from salted lard, tells the story of a life lived under a constant, whispering hunger. Modern dietary guidelines recommend around 2,000 calories per day for an average adult. These medieval reconstructions tell a starker tale, closer to 1,000 calories measured half by necessity, half by ingenuity. You let your fingertips brush a page, illustrating daily grain rations, roughly 2 pounds of coarse rye or barley flour, ground with millstones so basic that bits of husk remained, adding fibre but little nourishment. A sidebar notes occasional supplements, lentils when the soil held moisture, chickpeas traded at market, and the rare handful of beans scavenged from a neighbour's field. These pulses added protein, but you muse, also a certain flatulence that villagers likely tolerated in exchange for sustenance. A slender ceramic pot once used to store ale forms. Another chart, fermented barley, providing both calories and hydration. yet watered down by necessity until it resembled thin broth more than the robust drink travellers describe. Today, you might sip a cool glass of ale on a summer's eve. For a medieval peasant, each swallow was as much medicine as meal. You close your eyes and imagine the gentle burn of each gulp, chasing fatigue from bone and sinew. Next to the ale data, a small graph illustrates fats. Scarcely more than a tablespoon of animal fat or oil per day, lard rendered from older hogs, its flavour as rough as its texture, offered vital calories and a means to make bread more palatable. When the stew's bones were cracked clean, marrow lent richness. In its absence, households boiled acorns to extract oils, a bitter process that speaks to both desperation and resourcefulness. Your eyes drift to a chart of wild foods: nettle soup in spring, dandelion leaves tossed in pottage, and hawthorn berries foraged at woodland edges. These ingredients provided vitamins, though not enough to stave off scurvy entirely, and a bitter brightness against the constant blandness of grain. You picture peasants bending beneath hedgerows, pockets bulging with green bitterness, gathering nature's meagre gifts for their daily toil. The final table details caloric deficits across seasons: winter cold compounding hunger's bite, summer harvest easing strain only temporarily before stores ran low again. You trace the rise and fall of lines on the parchment, feeling the rhythm of lived hardship, the surge of abundance during harvest feast weeks, followed by the inexorable descent into lean months where daily intake dipped to 600 calories or fewer. You breathe out, letting these numbers settle. Half of modern minimum sounds clinical, yet it represents leathery hearts and sunken eyes, backs bent under loads of wood and grain. It speaks of children who knew the ache of empty bellies as easily as a lullaby, and of elders whose labour continued despite thinning flesh. And yet, within this scarcity, blooms a quiet ingenuity, the art of stretching flour with ground acorns, of coaxing flavour from vinegar and dung-smoked salt, of brewing fungi into ersatz cheese. You smile at a scribbled note in the margin: acorn coffee bitter but warming. The humour is subtle, a wink across centuries, as if the author recognised that necessity breeds not only innovation but wry amusement. Indeed, you imagine a household cobbling together a morning ritual, grinding acorns before dawn, boiling a murky decoction, and lifting mugs to each other with tentative grins. A breeze stirs the trench's tarp, lifting your thoughts to the present moment. You fold the parchment and tuck it into your satchel, leaving behind the silent charts to rest among beakers and microscopes. The human story they tell remains vividly alive in your mind. A tale of bodies sustained on the edge of endurance, of creativity flickering like a candle in the feastless dark. As you rise and brush dust from your knees, you carry with you the echo of caloric desperation, a reminder that every loaf baked, every pulse foraged, every ounce of fat preserved was a small victory in a world where ingenuity was the lifeblood of survival. In that whisper between scarcity and invention, you find both the fragility and the resilience of the human spirit. You crouch at the edge of the excavation pit where the town well once stood, its circular stone mouth long since collapsed. The afternoon sun casts a soft glow on the exposed sediment layers, strata of clay, pebble, and silt laid down over centuries. A gloved hand lifts a cylindrical cora, its metal shaft smeared with dark, wet sediment. You set it upright and slice into its length with a sterile blade, revealing bands of earth like the rings of a tree, each layer holding silent testimony to past seasons and forgotten lives. You draw near and lean down, inhaling a cool, earthy scent, tinged with something faintly acrid, an echo of what you'll soon find in the lab. A small sample is taken from the deepest band, mud deposited over 1,000 years ago. Beside you, a colleague labels the vial, Layer 3B, 12th century deposit. You imagine the well half built then, villagers raising its stones, unaware that the same rainwater seeping through fractured mortar would carry traces of waste from nearby latrines. In the makeshift field lab, you examine a microscope slide under pale light. There, against a backdrop of mineral grains, you spot the ghostly outlines of Escherichia coli, rod-shaped bacteria that have thrived in human intestines since time immemorial. A small flourish of color highlights Vibrio cholerae, comma-shaped pathogens, capable of unleashing brutal diarrhea and death. You adjust the focus and whisper, almost to yourself, a well that promised life became a conduit for disease. Back at the trench, you survey the uneven ground. To one side stands the latrine pit, its wooden frame long rotted, now a sunken scar in the earth. Perhaps in a more judicious design, it would have lain downhill or at a greater distance. Here it is perilously close to the water source. You imagine villagers descending a rickety ladder to relieve themselves, believing the breeze would carry away the stench, unaware that each drop joined the aquifer they would later draw from. You kneel and trace a finger along the collapsed stone lip of the well, feeling the rough, weathered surface beneath your glove. Each indentation marks a story: a mother lifting her pail for her child's bath, a peddler offering fresh water in exchange for a loaf of bread, a weary traveller pausing to quench a blistered tongue. And yet, each story carries a latent irony. The very element that sustains is also the vector of invisible death. You stand and brush dust from your knees, letting a faint smile ease the weight of discovery. It's almost humorous if history were a novel. The town that couldn't keep its waste downhill would be a fitting chapter title. You shake your head gently, aware that medieval engineers had knowledge of sanitation, but economic pressures and spatial constraints often prevailed over best practices. A gentle breeze stirs, carrying the scent of wild grasses and distant wood smoke. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the field's ambient chorus, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of a tractor, remind you that water remains central to life, even in the modern world. You think of current water treatment plants, of chlorine's bite and the hum of filtration systems, marveling at how far we've come since wells like this one sustained yet imperiled entire communities. Returning to the well's edge, you dig a small probe into the sediment, feeling the cool, damp layers give way beneath your fingers. You scoop a handful into your palm and lift it to the light, the fine, dark grains encrusted with microfossils, invisible to the naked eye. Each speck holds a memory of flow, the drip-drip of water filling buckets, the trickle cascading over stone steps, the last droplets that slaked a fevered brow before illness took hold. You carefully bag the sediment sample and close the core's sliding lock. As you stand, you glance at the distant skyline, church spires and tiled roofs, and realize that beneath every modern city, echoes of these medieval wells lie waiting. Lessons buried in mud. Among the traces of cholera, you see not only the threat of disease, but the resilience of communities that adapted in time, sealing wells, digging new pits, trusting that tomorrow's water would be safer than today. With that thought, you step away from the pit, the core in your hand and the sediment in your satchel. The well may be silent now, but in its layered remains, you've unearthed a story as old as civilization itself. That water, source of life and vessel of peril, demands both respect and vigilance, and that every drop we draw carries the weight of choices past and future. You stand in the dusty aftermath of the town's grand market fair, where just weeks ago brightly coloured canopies blossomed across the square, and laughter mingled with the clang of merchant bells. Now, silence hangs over the abandoned stalls like a tolling bell of its own. The boards where pies once cooled on linen have been swept, and faded ribbons droop from cartwheels long since stowed. Yet beneath this calm surface, a hidden tide of consequence is rising, the unseen aftermath of feasting and festivity. In the days following the fair, the town's small infirmary reports a steady trickle of new patients, but by the second week, that trickle becomes a flood. You imagine the health officers tallying names in ledgers by candlelight, tally marks blossoming across the page. Fevers spike in the late afternoon, drawing villagers from hearths to beds with shuddering coughs and aching limbs. Mothers clutch trembling infants, eyes wide with dread, while elders mutter prayers learned in safer times. The mortality rate, once a grim but steady companion, now surges like unwanted tidewater, lapping at doorsteps and carrying off the vulnerable with quiet mercilessness. You wander down to the well at the square's centre, its stone curb chalky with lime wash. Not long ago, water is assembled here in daily ritual, pails clinking in time with market cries. But during the fair, that ritual swelled into a jostling sea of thirst, carts lining up for barrels of ale, children dipping wooden buckets into its depths, travellers scooping water between quaffs of spiced wine. In the crush of bodies, no one paused to wonder whether the slate of granite could filter out the stray bit of trampled produce or the handful of festival mud that found its way in. Now, signs warn to boil before drawing water, a proclamation read aloud at the chapel door and pinned to the bakehouse hump. Boiling is an inconvenience when wood is scarce, and not everyone heeds the warning. You imagine the villagers' daily decisions, a quick sip now, or a slower fire later. Many choose the convenience of the well. As a result, whispers spread of dysentery and the agues caught in a single gulp or two, You pause beside a shuttered alehouse doorway, remembering the revelry just a fortnight past. The stench of spilled barley and trampled hop vines still clings faintly to the cobblestones. Now that same stone harbours the pathogens spawned in the swirl of market boots and dancing skirts. Every group that sang with sails or shared platters of meat pie contributed to this invisible bloom of disease. At dusk, you visit the charnel grounds by the old chapel, where rudimentary graves have been dug in neat rows. Pairs of parish priests stand at the foot of each fresh mound, their soft chants a lullaby for the departed. Here, death's hush falls more heavily than any summer's dusk. A young boy, no older than 10, lies wrapped in coarse linen. Next to him, an elderly baker whose loaves once sweetened children's mornings. Their lives, so different, converged in these days of unwitting contagion. You inhale the faint tang of earth and incense, balancing grief with the practical knowledge that funerals cannot halt the night's spread. You reflect on how celebration so often carries its own price. The fleeting sweetness of market treats exchanged for the lingering bitterness of illness. The town's weekly fair, once a symbol of abundance and community, now stands as a cautionary tale etched into memory. In your mind, you trace the cycle that begins with flourishing stalls and ends with lined coffins, the market's vibrant pulse giving way to the sickbed's hushed vigil and then to silent graves. Yet beneath the sorrow lies a lesson of resilience. Water filters are being built from charcoal and cloth. Public notices remind children to keep their cups off the ground, and healers extend their hours to soothe the fevered and tend the weak. You rise and brush soil from your tunic, letting the chapel's chiming bells anchor you back to the present. The town will endure. Eventually the wells will run clear, the market fair return, and laughter once again mingle with the bells. But for now, you carry the weight of feast day infection spikes in your breath, a reminder that every joyous gathering must be balanced with vigilance, for even the sweetest moments can leave bitter echoes in their wake. You step away from the languid stillness of the medieval well site and into the hum of a modern refugee camp's water station, an echo of past missteps given contemporary form. Here, stainless steel barrels rest on wooden frames, canvas filters draped like makeshift curtains, and a steady line of residents brings empty jerry cans to refill. The aroma of treated water, clean, neutral, carries a whisper of chlorination, a far cry from the mucky, fetid tang you traced in sediment cores. Yet it was those very cores rich with E. coli and cholera spores that taught today's health workers the simplest truths. Distance matters, and so does even the humblest filter. You drift alongside a team of public health volunteers, draping layers of fine cloth over barrel openings. Each cloth, a scrap of cotton, a swath of gauze, catches silt, insect fragments, and stray plant debris. You watch a volunteer pour water in a slow, steady stream, the liquid dribbling through textiles and emerging on the other side with a clarity that would once have seemed pure magic to medieval villagers. A few specks remain, but most impurities settle in the filter's folds, awaiting the scrub of a brush and the sun's antiseptic glare. Nearby, a small group of camp residents carry out a sanitation drill beneath the shade of canvas tarps. They've laid out simple charcoal canisters, hollowed logs filled with coconut husk charcoal, tipped with sand in layers that mimic commercial water filters. You observe them pour jerry can water through the setup, transforming the once brownish liquid into a translucent stream. Children gather, wide-eyed as a woman sweetly demonstrates, "Behold, our own medieval alchemy," and the group giggles at the notion that they're practicing caravan tricks far removed from desert sands, but rooted in the same principles. A health educator stands beside a flip chart, tracing a diagram of a well, latrine, and living quarters. With a calm detachment, she explains why medieval wells dug too close to waste pits became death traps. Why today, refugee tents must be sited uphill of latrines, and kitchens positioned away from communal toilets. You note her use of simple steps, at least 30 paces between, she says, tapping her heel against the ground to mark the distance. Each resident repeats the measure in unison, boots and flip-flops echoing a shared mantra: separation prevents contagion. In a nearby cooking tent, a volunteer boils a pot of water over a portable stove. The hiss of bubbles and the rising steam carry a tactile warmth that invites appreciation, a reminder that boiling, the oldest form of purification, remains a stalwart defense. You inhale the soft metallic tang of the kettle, a far cry from medieval clay's earthy whisper. It comforts you to see this ritual persist. the simple flick of flame transforming danger into safety. You wander further, observing a sanitation poster pinned to a plywood board. It reproduces a simplified version of archaeological charts, jars stuffed with maggots and sediment cores scored with E. coli markers. Beneath each image, bold letters declare lessons learned: filter it, boil it, space it out. The poster's playful tone, a cartoon maggot with a speech bubble saying, "Get out of my pantry," elicits a ripple of laughter among onlookers, a small but potent reminder that even in the gravest of contexts, humor helps knowledge stick. In the lull between drills, you stand beneath a shipping container shower stall rigged with a foot pump. The gentle splash of water against metal recalls the medieval rain-filtered cisterns that once sustained villages and their failings when clogged with debris. Here, though, water flushes cleanly, waste redirected through hoses to soak pits well beyond living quarters. You gratefully step inside, letting the cool spray wash away dust and the invisible echoes of past epidemics. As evening drapes the camp in soft ambers of solar lamps, you reflect on the continuity between eras. Medieval wells and latrines were lessons carved in clay and bone. Today they inform life-saving designs in places far from cathedral spires. In a world of modern crises, those slimy jars and layered sediments are not relics but guides. Timeless reminders that water's gift can become its curse without simple foresight. You breathe in the filtered air, tasting the faint promise of safe water on your tongue. You walk away, carrying the collaged wisdom of archaeologists and aid workers alike. That the humblest cloth can save lives, that space is as necessary as soap, and that, across centuries, every drop we guard with care carries the weight of history's hardest-earned truths. You arrive in the town square on a misty morning, where the market stretches in neat rows of stalls and the clatter of wooden scales echoes off stone walls. At the center, an official in a sable cloak stands beside a steely beam balance, its polished arms hanging from iron hooks, ready to test loaves and measure casks of ale. He is the royal assize officer, charged with enforcing the kingdom's ordinance on bread and beer, a mandate that no loaf weigh less, nor ale pour less, than the measures decreed by the crown. The hush settles as the first baker approaches, his arms calloused from kneading and his apron dusted with flour. In his hands he holds a round loaf, its crust the color of honeyed wood. The officer gestures for the dough to rest on the scale's left pan. A crowd gathers, farmers, merchants, curious children, each craning to see the small weights clink onto the opposite pan, a half-pound lead weight, then a quarter, then the final piece. The loaf tilts ever so slightly under its own heft, and the officer's brow furrows. You feel the square's cool air turn taut with anticipation. The baker wipes sweat from his brow, flour and labor leaving indistinct smudges, and shifts foot to foot. He glances at his neighbors, a brewer adjusting casks nearby, a miller leaning against his sack of grain, all waiting to see if royal law will punish or forgive this small discrepancy. The officer places a single finger on the scale's beam and lets it settle. If the loaf is underweight by a hair's breadth, a fine in pennies or worse, public shaming awaits. This morning the loaf tips correctly, a soft cheer rises, and the baker exhales, relief smoothing the lines of his face. The officer nods curtly and stamps the loaf's base with a small iron seal, a symbol of conformity to the assize of bread. That seal is more than ink and metal. It is the baker's shield against complaint, a promise to every customer that their crust will meet the crown's standard. Across the square, the brewer steps forward, hefting a half-ale jug into the officer's waiting hands. The officer pours, the ale's amber stream catching the dawn light, froth hissing softly as it meets the wood. Pints are counted, measure by measure, and at each pour the officer's rod tests the level against a carved notch. Too little, and the brewer's profits evaporate in fines. Too much and generosity could arouse suspicion of impropriety. This law, you reflect, balances on the line between fairness and survival. A hush falls again as the final drop empties the jug. The brewer, a barrel-chested man with wiry arms, wipes his palms on his hose, awaiting judgment. When the officer nods, the brewer allows himself a modest grin. He finger-taps the bottom of his cask in a brief salute, an echo of gratitude that persists even under the watchful eye of regulation. You step aside, letting the next traders undergo the same ritual. You notice how the weight standards shape more than commerce. They guide villagers' daily routines, dictate grain orders from the mill, and even influence which breads are cheapest on market days. Bakers learn to blend flours, barley for heft, rye for flavour, to meet weight without emptying their stores. Brewers craft ales of varying strength, mindful that too potent a brew may tempt authorities more than customers. A child tugs at his mother's sleeve, curious about the scale's weights, each one a leaden promise of justice. She explains that the assize keeps bakers honest, ensuring no one sells a loaf lighter than the law allows. The child considers this, eyes wide, then tilts his head and whispers, "But must the law check even good bakers?" His mother smiles wryly, "Especially the good ones, my dear. That way all must play fair." The market's rhythm resumes. Coins jingle, carts rattle over cobbles, and loaves pass from hands to waiting baskets. Yet beneath the bustle, the assize of bread and ale remains a silent conductor, setting the tempo for every transaction. In this intersection of royal ordinance and daily need, you sense the delicate balance, regulation guarding against exploitation, but also pressing bakers and brewers to navigate law and livelihood with equal care. And as the morning mists lift, you carry with you the lesson that even the humblest loaf and jug dance to the measured cadence of authority and survival. You step into the market on a soft morning breeze, the air still carrying dawn's chill, and find the stalls arranged in neat rows under canvas awnings. The scent of fresh bread mingles with the earthy aroma of brewing grains, promising simple pleasures. Yet beneath these familiar comforts lies a hidden undercurrent, the quiet calculus of profit pressing bakers and brewers into corners where survival and honesty collide. At Master Alewing's stall, you watch as he lifts a loaf, its crust gleaming with the sheen of a baker's pride. Yet when you lean closer, you catch a faint chalky tang on the breeze, an odour so subtle it might pass for ash from the hearth. It is chalk, added to stretch precious flour into more loaves. Aylwin learned this trick from his own father, who learned it from his grandmother. "Just a pinch," they'd say, "to keep the ovens warm and the bills paid." You imagine the hush of pre-dawn kneading flour, water, and that near-invisible mineral dust, mixed until the dough feels supple yet substantial. You taste a small crumb offered by a passing child, a polite nod to the baker's generosity, and nearly blink away the whisper of bitterness that follows. It is not unpleasant, but it carries a memory of limestone cliffs and schoolroom chalkboards. You chew deliberately, noticing how the crumb's texture seems firmer, more resilient, than plain rye, as if the chalk lends a bracing skeleton to the loaf. The child smiles, unaware of the recipe's hidden calculus, and you nod in shared complicity. Survival sometimes demands small deceits. Apeth's alehouse sits just beyond the baker's row, a small tavern whose windows glow with promise. Inside, barrels line the walls, their spigots dribbling samples into pewter cups. You draw a cup of the house ale, once a rich, amber swirl, but tonight it's lighter, almost watery. The brewer, a lean fellow named Garrick, has admitted to adding well water to stretch his casks further. He describes the process with matter-of-fact ease. 5 parts ale to 1 part water, just enough to fill the pewter and fool the thirst. You raise an eyebrow as you sip, the liquid's body thinner than you remember, slipping past your lips with a faint tickle of disappointment. Outside, a group of patrons debate the tavern's quality. One grumbles that last night's ale felt more like broth. Another counters that any warmth against the chill is a kindness. You sense the balance they strike between expectation and necessity, humour threading through their complaints. "Tomorrow, I'll bring my own cup," one jokes, and see if Garrick waters it again. Laughter ripples around the hearth, binding them in shared experience even as each sip risks unsettled stomachs. You wander through the square, past stalls of cheese and smoky meats. Here too, rumours swirl of adulteration, cheese stretched with chalky curd to mimic age, salted herring soaked in brine laced with river water. Each tale carries a moral: too much thrift can erode trust. A village elder warns travellers to dip spoons in pots before drinking, to test for unexpected dilution. You imagine the spoons metal cold against eager lips, each cautious tremor a small defense in a world where flavor and safety share an unsteady friendship. In the heart of the square, the assize officer stands watch, an ever-present sentinel against these shortcuts. His scales weigh loaves, his rod measures ale. Yet, you know the system strains under limited manpower and widespread need. Tickets for fines flutter between trees, but convictions remain few, for the populace understands that economic hardship pushes honest folk toward desperate measures. As the sun climbs, you pause by a well-worn bench, noting how the market's tide washes in cycles of trust and suspicion. The chalk that crunches beneath a loaf, and the water that thins a tavern's ale, both whisper the same truth. In scarcity, ethics can blur at the edges. You trace a finger along the bench's carved initials, tokens of countless market days, wondering how many hands have held chalky bread or raised watered ale to trembling lips. With a final breath, you rise and step back into the market's gentle murmur. The square hums with life, bakers reshaping dough, brewers topping barrels, villagers bartering for tomorrow's sustenance. In that steady hum, you sense humanity's enduring choice to temper necessity with honesty, or to skirt the line for short-term gain. And as you carry this quiet reflection onward, you remind yourself that every loaf and cup bears both flavor and consequence, woven together in the delicate tapestry of medieval survival. You slip into the market square just after dawn, when mist still clings to the uneven cobblestones, and the first stalls rattle into life. A handful of bailiffs, leather-clad figures with iron-tipped staves, stand at intervals, their eyes sweeping the square with practiced nonchalance. Yet you know their impartial watch is often for sale, a discreet pouch of silver slipped under a cloak or tucked into a belt, and suddenly they become shadows rather than sentinels, willing to overlook a loaf too light or a jug too thin. You pause by a stall where a buxom baker discreetly slides a small leather purse across the table's edge. The bailiff stationed nearby glances away just as the purse's flap disappears beneath the bread basket. A moment later, the baker lifts a loaf stamped not with the royal seal, but with his own initials, an unmarked sign of illicit flour. He offers you a broken crust, its texture oddly light, and you bite into it, tasting that faint echo of chalk and wonder at the power of a little coin to reshape the day's ration. Across the square, a crowd gathers, more out of curiosity than commerce. You weave through them to find a small bonfire of broken bread loaves, their crusts blackening in damp smoke. Peasants smirk as they swing their boots, sending chunks of underweight loaves skittering across the mud. Each thud carries a note of defiance, a loaf too light, a promise too easily broken. Now shards of rebellion underfoot. A woman in a threadbare shawl grabs a half loaf and hammers it into the muck, grumbling about cheaters and their cheap tricks. A boy joins in, gleefully smashing the last crust until the pile resembles a shattered puzzle. You hear someone behind you comment, "Justice tastes sour," and you can't help but offer a quiet chuckle. It is vigilante justice, not sanctioned by any crown or court, yet powered by communal outrage and the crisp satisfaction of setting wrong right, however briefly. Nearby, two bailiffs watch without intervening, one leaning on his staff, the other idly polishing his tarnished badge. When you lock eyes with the younger man, he shrugs with exaggerated innocence, then flicks his gaze back to the bonfire. It is a silent pact. The peasants release their fury on the guilty loaves, and the bailiffs claim they never saw a thing. Mud splashes against trembling boots, and you sense the market's heartbeat quicken, a pulse driven by shared violation and communal correction. You step toward a barrel of water used for rinsing produce, its surface mirror calm amid the square's turmoil. A passerby washes his hands, swirling the water into muddy rings, then splashes his face, shaking off crumbs and shame. The water's coolness brings a momentary clarity, reminding you that justice, like cleanliness, demands regular tending or it becomes as murky as these cobbles. Elsewhere in the square, a bard sings of the Great Loaf Rebellion, his lute's gentle chords weaving humor into the morning's discontent. Villagers toss coins into his hat, gratified that even parody can carry a kernel of truth, that power, when corrupted, invites correction from those it most wrongs. The bard's refrain, "Let every crumb be weighed, let every coin be paid," echoes softly, a lullaby of fairness for weary souls. You wander past a stall, where a brewer fetches a cracked barrel, exchanging it for a fresh one supplied by none other than the tavern's regulars. They pool pennies to buy the brewer's silence voucher, enough coin to keep that barrel's ale at full measure. The brewer douses the old barrel's spigot with vinegar and salt, stamps it with a seal of contrition, and promises his customers that tomorrow's ale is honest. The ritual rings hollow yet hopeful, a fragile truce between commerce and conscience. As the sun climbs, the square's frenzy settles into a steady hum. Bailiffs resume their rounds, faces neutral once more. Peasants collect repaired baskets and head home with rightful loaves. Bakers reload their ovens with genuine dough. The mud dries underfoot, and the shattered crusts are swept into wheelbarrows, memory of last night's revolt. You step back, leaving the square to its rhythms of bread and barter. In your wake remains a tableau of corruption checked by common will, loaves smashed in mud, coins quietly exchanged, and a song rising above the clatter. In this gentle upheaval, you sense that even when authority falters, the market's heart beats steady, driven by people who know that fairness, like bread, must be kneaded by many hands. You enter the great hall under a canopy of torchlight, where every shimmering surface seems to tremble with anticipation. Flickering flames dance across gilded candelabras, and the polished marble floor reflects 1,000 points of light. As your eyes adjust, you see long tables draped in embroidered tapestries, crimson velvet catching the glow, each place set with silver charger plates and crystal goblets that promise more than mere refreshment. At the table's center, the feast unfolds like a living pageant. Whole swans, plucked from river locks and fattened for weeks, lie splayed on platters, their reattached feathers gleaming in iridescent blues and greens. Carvers in formal livery hover nearby, their slender blades ready to transform proud birds into delicate slices for the king's retinue. You imagine the hush that falls when the first swan is carved, an almost ritual silence broken only by the soft scrape of steel against bone. Beyond the swans, peacocks command attention, their jeweled plumage affixed once more to their roasted frames, tails fanned in a display of silent majesty. The sight is both enchanting and uncanny, a living coat of arms given new life atop savory flesh. Courtiers murmur appreciatively at the artistry, fingers trailing through peacock eye spots as though touching the rarest of jewels. For a moment you almost expect the bird to stir to reclaim flight beneath the vaulted ceiling. Nearby, sugar sculptures rise like miniature castles, towering spires carved from crystallized sweetness, turrets gleaming with colored glass beads made of candied fruit. Each battlement is laced with spun sugar filigree, delicate as the finest lace. You lean closer, detecting the faint scent of caramelized honey and citrus, a fragrance that dances with the faint musk of roasted game. It is showmanship at its finest, a confectionery allegory of royal power, reminding every guest that these halls are realms of both taste and authority. In one corner, a sideboard hosts exotic fruits, glossy pomegranates, split to reveal jewel-like seeds, clusters of figs so plump they seem to spill sweet juice at a light touch, and a single melon cracked open as though by divine hand, its pale flesh hydrating the air with summer's promise. These fruits, carried across mountain passes and perilous seas, testify to the kingdom's reach and the wealth that underwrites such abundance. You pluck a seed from a pomegranate, letting its tart burst linger on your tongue. Even this small taste carries the echo of distant orchards and treacherous trade routes. The hall's musicians drift through these tables, their soft harp strings and lute chords weaving a gentle soundtrack to the culinary theatre. A gentle drum taps the pace, coaxing guests to linger over each course without haste. No harsh trumpets here, only the steady pulse of music that guides the feast forward like a whispered invitation rather than a clarion call. Across from you, a noblewoman inspects her plate, studying each component as though appraising art. She dips a silver fork into a swan's breast, then tastes a sugar castle's sugared pinnacle. Her expression is thoughtful, pleasure tempered by the knowledge that every bite reaffirms the hierarchy of this world. Birds reclaimed from death, fruits that defy distance, sweetness sculpted into fortresses, all speak of a monarchy whose power is as ornate as its table. As the torches deepen into embers and the final strains of music linger, you rise and step back from the spectacle. The feathers, the sugar, the fruits, they will pass into memory as easily as the feast passes into stomachs. Yet the echoes remain, a reminder that medieval banquets were more than meals. They were performances of power, dances of piety and pageantry, where every ingredient and every gesture proclaimed the realm's grand design. In the hush that follows, you catch a stray feather on your cloak, its iridescence half hidden in shadow. You let it fall, recalling the night's showmanship, and savouring its reflection on human ambition, flamboyant, fleeting, and forever woven into the tapestry of history. You settle into a carved oak chair, placed at the long, candlelit table of the great hall, its surface gleaming under silver goblets, brimming with spiced wine. The aroma of mulled clove and cinnamon drifts through the air, warm as a reminder of hearth fires and home comforts. Yet here, amid the soft glow and sweet scents, an unspoken game unfolds. Political theatre in which every sip, every softened smile, and every crumb of confection feeds alliances as much as appetites. Across from you, Lord Ashbury raises his goblet in a deliberate arc, eyes finding the king's, with practiced deference. He speaks in measured tones of distant border disputes, praising the monarch's wisdom. Each phrase is a seasoning, just a pinch of flattery mixed with genuine respect to sharpen his standing at court. You sense the care in his words. Too much praise would reek of desperation. Too little, and the favour he seeks might slip away. His voice, soft as velvet, nevertheless cuts through the hall's murmur like a well-honed blade. Nearby, Lady Tremaine leans to the Duke on her right, her fan fluttering open like a silent semaphore. She murmurs something witty about the sweetness of the wine, and you glimpse a flicker of amusement in the Duke's eyes. Whether her compliment is meant for the brew or the lord is unclear, but that uncertainty is the point, an artful ambiguity that keeps attention locked on her every move. You note how even these casual murmurs carry weight, a soft jest here, a sly compliment there, each move choreographed to influence allegiance. The steward brings forth the next course, pheasants stuffed with raisins and almonds, their plumage replaced by gilded leaves. As the pheasants arrive, a subtle shift takes place. Guests lean forward, expressions brightening, plates tilting as if to catch every ornate presentation. Behind each plate, brokers of power slip notes between fingers, tiny scraps of vellum marking lands to be exchanged, debts to be forgiven, titles to be bestowed. You imagine these notes as spices themselves, potent additives that flavour the realm's future. A group of knights, gauntleted and gloved, huddles at one end of the table. Their laughter rumbles like distant drums. They toast each other, muscles relaxing beneath embroidered tunics. Yet, when the king's gaze falls upon them, their raillery softens into respectful nods. They know the rules of this theatre. Jests are safe only within a narrow circle, and loyalties must be proclaimed with care. One knight taps a finger on the table, tracing a line in spilled wine, an unspoken promise to defend a neighbour's claim if the moment favours him. Between courses, the minstrels play a gentle melody, allowing conversation to flourish without haste. A baroness dips a porcelain spoon into a tureen of saffron soup, spoons up a single taste, and offers it to the earl beside her. He nods, and she removes a folded parchment from her sleeve, an invitation to discuss a marriage alliance for her daughter. Their exchange is so fluid it seems like an afterthought. Yet the subtlety is the true power play, alliances built not with the clang of swords but with careful whispers over shared flavours. You tilt your goblet to toast a nearby count, his banner embroidered on his cloak in deep gold, raising a silent salute to your own safety at these convivial tables. He returns the gesture, his eyes twinkling with recognition, and you sense the fragile web of trust that binds each noble here. Even laughter, you realise, serves as a currency. A shared chuckle can bridge rival houses, while a scowl can undo months of goodwill. As the final course arrives, delicate pastries crusted with rose-petal sugar, you lean back, the memory of flavours lingering on your tongue. The hall's grandeur, the soft murmurs, the clinking goblets, all blend into a tapestry of power and piety, where every course is brokered influence, and every gesture shapes the kingdom's tapestry. In this soft, perfumed theatre, you see that alliances are less carved in stone than kneaded in dough and distilled in wine, a gentle alchemy of trust and taste that parades power on the grandest of platters. You lean back in your carved oak seat as the final platters of the evening are presented, the hall's torchlight dancing across polished marble and mirrored silver. For a moment, the air brims with anticipation. The scent of spiced meats has given way to subtler perfumes, rosewater, pastries and preserved quince candied in runny honey. Yet beneath these sweet notes lies an undercurrent of unease, a subtle warning that even the most lavish spread can turn against its diners. Across the table, a custard of buttery eggs and cream is ladled into shallow bowls. Its surface shimmers like melted gold, flecked with saffron threads. You bring your spoon to the rim, but pause when you notice a fine bloom at the edge. Tiny, powdery spots where the custard's delicate balance has tipped towards spoilage. You push the bowl gently back to its owner, a politely raised eyebrow, conveying your concern more eloquently than words could dare. The Duke, eager to impress the king, leans in nonetheless, and you hold your breath at each spoonful he takes. Not far off, a silver dish of pike and papilote is unveiled. Flaky fillets, steamed in parchment, scented with parsley and lemon. The first whiff is intoxicating, a promise of river's bounty, but as the stewards slice into the fish, a sour note hisses through the steam, like vinegar left too long exposed. A guest recoils slightly, hand lifting in a quick reflex, to catch a slip of broth in mid-air. A cough follows, soft but urgent, and you glimpse a flicker of dread in his eyes. As the revelry falters, you watch the master of ceremonies, robes rustling like whispered apologies, motion discreetly for fresh wine. Carafes are exchanged with practiced haste, the deep red vintage replacing the suspect pour with something more reassuring. Yet, even this substitution cannot erase the knowledge that a single misstep in timing or temperature can turn abundance into adversity. Moments later, an elderly baron squeezes his midsection and rises, face pale beneath his ornate helm. He moves with slow deliberation toward the chamber pot awaiting by a curtained corner. His steps are punctuated by soft gasps, and you catch a faint glimpse of distress peeking from beneath his velveteen hood. Fellow guests avert their eyes, some offering discreet nods of sympathy as they pass, while others tilt their goblets in silent acknowledgement that fate has played a cruel trick tonight. You recall the summer's salmon too, its flesh buttery and fresh when first served, but cursed by an unseen chill in the kitchen cellars. The spoilage spread quietly, preparing itself like a slow curtain across the grand performance of the feast. Each bite carried its own gamble. Would it delight or debilitate? In the hush that follows the baron's departure, the joyful murmurs stutter and falter. Even the music softens, lutes and harps pausing mid-strum, as though startled by the sudden emptiness. A hush swallows the hall, and you sense a collective realization that opulence, for all its grandeur, is not immune to decay. Every delicacy, from the gilded swans to the sugar castles, carries within it the seed of ruin, if left too long in the shadows of candlelight. Yet, in this moment of crisis, subtle humour flickers at the edges. A courtier quips that perhaps the late pike was preserved by ancient curses rather than steam, prompting a ripple of wry smiles. Laughter, delicate and brittle, threads through the tension, an acknowledgement that humans, even amidst peril, seek to soften the sting of misfortune with a wry grin. You gather your composure and take a final sip of the replacement wine, its tannins firm yet balanced, a small salvation in the wake of earlier misadventure. You savour the wine's warmth as it flows down, a reminder that even spoiled plenty can give way to a fresher vintage. In that gesture you find both caution and comfort, a lesson that vigilance must accompany indulgence, and that every banquet, no matter how sumptuous, carries within it the quiet possibility of peril. As the hall's torches gutter low and the last guest drift toward the exits, you rise and leave behind an echo of careful steps and measured breath, an impermanent farewell to a night where extravagance danced with the spectre of spoilage, and where even power's grandest parades found their limits in the fickle realms of taste and time. You tread softly through the monastery's cloister at dawn, where every arch and column still glimmers with last night's dew. The air is cool and carries a subtle brine, the promise of salted cod soon to scent the kitchen. For weeks now, Lent has dictated the rhythm of life here. 6 days a week, meat is forbidden, and even dairy and eggs lie off the menu on certain fasts. Yet out of necessity and a dash of ingenuity, the monks have devised loopholes to bring variety to their bare tables. In the bakehouse you find half a dozen loaves resting on wooden boards, their crusts brushed with fish oil instead of butter. The aroma is unexpected. Beneath the bread's warm, yeasty tang lies a whisper of the sea, a peculiar undernote that tingles the nose. A young brother lifts a slice and dips it in a shallow bowl of cold water sprinkled with salt. He breathes in the resulting scent, bracing, elemental, and says with a half-smile, "Sea spray without a storm." You nod, sharing in his wry amusement at how a humble loaf can summon visions of crashing waves. Nearby, a kettle simmers with chunks of salt-cured cod suspended in its steaming embrace. The flesh is firm from the curing process, each cube translucent and flecked with crystalline salt. As the water bubbles, it draws out both moisture and flavour, transforming brine-soaked fillets into tender flakes that will soon top pottage or replace meat in hearty stews. You watch a venerable monk ladle the cod into a waiting bowl, his hands steady despite the day's fast. He offers you a small taste, a morsel no larger than your thumbnail, and you savor the fish's smoky richness, knowing this simple luxury would have been forbidden only days ago. But the true ingenuity lies in the fish-flavored breads, made when strict rules prohibit any form of animal oil. Monastic tradition allows peppers, herbs, and a small amount of fish oil, under certain dispensations, so the brothers concoct a thin paste of crushed cod, mixed with garlic and wild herbs. They slather this paste inside a folded loaf before baking, producing a warm aromatic parcel that tastes of smoky fish and green garden notes. You break one open and inhale the mingled scents of sea and soil. It is as comforting as any hearthside loaf. Beyond the kitchen's half door, you glimpse secret gatherings of novices comparing their own loophole recipes. Someone has discovered that a handful of mustard seeds yields a pungent bite akin to meat's savor. Another insists that a dash of ground seaweed, dried and pounded, adds an umami depth that elevates every fast day dish. They swap notes in hushed tones, laughter floating like candle smoke through the corridor. The abbot, you're told, is fond enough of these culinary minor litanies that he winks at their creativity, provided the spirit of abstinence remains intact. In the refectory, rows of monks gather at long, narrow tables. They dip fish oil bread into steaming bowls of chickpea porridge, the broth clinging to each crust with a gentle, glistening sheen. A monk to your left murmurs, "Isn't it odd? We fast on meat, to show piety, yet greet cod as if it were a feast." His tone is playful, the remark light as a feather brushing the table. You chuckle softly, acknowledging that even in devotion, human nature nudges us toward comfort. Outside, the sun climbs higher, and the garden's herbs, rosemary, thyme, sorrel, unfurl their green promise. You imagine them plucked to flavor tomorrow's fish bread, or to scent a modest stew. The monk's careful work echoes the cloister's balance, restraint tempered with creativity, solemn rules woven with threads of humor and ingenuity. As you rise to leave, you feel the satisfying weight of tradition and invention mingled in your senses. The salty tang of cod lingers on your lips, the warm belly of bread remains in your memory, and the quiet chuckles of fish-flavored loopholes echo in your mind. Here, in the hush of Lenten rites, the church's dual dance of deprivation and celebration finds its sweetest harmony, in every clever workaround and every soul-satisfying bite. You slip through a tucked-away doorway off the castle's main kitchen, where the clatter of pots and rush of flames give way to whispered alchemy. Here, in the private annex reserved for highborn feasts, two sous chefs lean over polished copper cauldrons, their hoods casting soft shadows across the gentle curl of steam. The air is thick with the green perfume of parsley, rosemary and mint, a fragrant overture that promises refreshment, even as you know its true purpose is a quiet subversion of Lent's harshest demands. One cook lifts a sprig of rosemary, studded with dewdrop-like beads of condensation. He clamps it between fingertip and thumb, letting its essential oils bloom before dropping it into a swirling herb sauce. The midday sun filters through a narrow slit in the stone wall, illuminating the sauce's surface in glinting bands of emerald and gold. Yet beneath this verdant sheen lies a sly addition, bacon drippings salvaged from yesterday's roast, carefully strained to remove any overt traces of meat. The fat, once run out of a crisp rind, now lends the sauce a silken texture that no herb alone could achieve. Beside him, the second cook works with similar purpose, stirring a cauldron of ale-battered fish. He pauses to dip a ladle into a separate pot of seasoned oil, once pork fat, now scented with thyme and a pinch of salt, and drizzles it sparingly into the batter, before ladling the fish into ribbons of sizzling heat. The crackle is quiet but insistent, as though the fire itself recognizes a small rebellion. You inhale the aroma, smoky bacon notes phrasing the fish's pale sweetness, a hint of piety masked by the boldest of indulgences. A hush falls when the head chef enters, his robes brushing like whispered secrets against the stone floor. He eyes the simmering pots and offers a brief nod, then lifts a small wooden box from a shelf. Inside, bundles of fresh tarragon, sage and lemon balm lie neatly tied with hemp twine. With deliberate care he unspools a few leaves of lemon balm, crushing them between fingertips and dropping them into both sauces. Their citrusy brightness is more than flavor. It's the theological justification for hidden fats, a divine olive branch extended to the palate. As the chefs ladle sauces into earthenware bowls lined up on a silver tray, you note the meticulous care each applies, not a drop more drippings than required. lest a wandering eye or curious palate detect the subterfuge. Even the bowls themselves bear discreet crosses etched into their rims, a silent reminder that every indulgence here wears the cloak of devotion. You follow the tray into the great hall, where a single shaft of light strikes the center table, catching motes of dust in its glow. Nobles gather in high-backed chairs, their tunics resplendent, yet tempered by the day's fast. A hush of expectancy greets the arrival of the sauces. You watch the first noblewoman, her fingers adorned with slender rings, lift a spoonful and drizzle it across her boiled fish. Her eyes close in brief ecstasy as the herb's crisp tang and the bacon's warmth mingle on her tongue. A hush of polite murmurs follows. Exquisite balance, someone intones. So light, yet so rich. Laughter ripples at the edges, gentle, knowing. The phrase grace of herbs arises in a whispered toast, a compliment and a confession all at once. The diners share a quiet bond, understanding that beneath layers of leaf and broth, a humble trick of pork brings them comfort in the midst of scarcity. You linger at the hall's threshold, absorbing the scene. Candled faces bright in reflection, steam curling from bowls like facetious smoke signals, and the soft clink of spoons as guests savor each bite. Here, culinary cunning and spiritual discipline intertwine. The covert dance of drippings and greenery, a testament to human ingenuity. The grace of herbs works its magic best in silence. No bold proclamation, no overt indulgence, only the tender embrace of flavor that feels at once righteous and richly forbidden. As the diners rise and the final plates depart, you return to the quiet annex. The cauldron's cool, the last rosemary stalks float in spent oil, and the stone walls absorb the lingering warmth. In this retreat, you reflect on the paradox of fasting and feasting, how rules meant to bind appetite can inspire the most delicate rebellions. The bacon drippings vanish in herb's embrace, leaving behind a gentle reminder that, even in the strictest rites, the heart carves out its own pathway to solace, one fragrant spoonful at a time. You slip out of the chapel's shadow into the sunlit village green, where fluttering banners, crimson gold, and deep violet, flutter from wooden poles, blessed in last week's procession. The air is bright with early afternoon warmth, and a hush of expectancy ripples through the gathered crowd as the church bell tolls thrice, its echoes nudging the feast into motion. At one end of the green stands the roasting spit, a rugged frame of ashwood poles and iron spits, where a whole hog turns slowly above embers of applewood. Sweet smoke curls skyward in lazy tendrils, weaving between childhood shrieks of delight and the low murmur of conversation. You draw near, catching the aroma of crackling skin seared to mahogany perfection, its rich fat dripping into the coals with a gentle hiss. Steam rises from scoring cuts, bombarding your senses with the promise of savory warmth. Nearby, rough-hewn trestle tables, grown under platters of spiced buns, their dough flecked with cinnamon, nutmeg, and candied orange peel. Each bun is crowned with a single glistening currant, like a drop of crystallized dawn. Bakers in linen smocks move among the tables, offering trays and wiping sweaty brows with dark, flour-dusted napkins. They joke softly about fasting's end. Tomorrow, we'll repent, but today we done. Their laughter mingles with the haze of smoke and scent, a playful counterpoint to the solemnity of the season's fast. At the green's heart, a band of minstrels tunes lutes, tambourines, and a small fiddle whose bowstroke promises a lively beat. The first notes ring clear, a brisk dance tune that pivots on a melodic thread of civic pride. Couples link arms, young and old alike, in swirling circles, their feet raising puffs of dust. The dance is simple, a toe-and-heel shuffle that nonetheless glitters with communal joy. Each spin an unspoken toast to saint and hearth. Beyond the dancers, children dart between legs, trailing ribbons plucked from the banners. They clutch wooden swords carved for the day's mock battles, harmless skirmishes that evoke knights defending their faith. You pause to watch a pair of boys spar on a patch of grass, grins splitting their faces as they tap each other's shields. Even their pantomime battle carries the festival's spirit, piety laced with playful bravado. Onlookers dip into their bread baskets, tearing off hunks of pork-laden meat, as laughter and music swell around them. You taste a crisp fragment of hogskin, its fat rendered to airy crispness, crackling like ancient pottery under your teeth, and feel the smoky sweetness spill through your senses. Each bite is a small defiance of Lent's lean discipline, a permission slip to savor until the next bell tolls the call back to restraint. As the afternoon wanes, a show of pageantry unfolds beneath the church's banner. A mock trial of the fast king. A straw effigy robed in mock ermine, judged by a court of peasants in makeshift robes. They assemble upon a hay bale dais, reading humorous charges, and pronouncing light-hearted sentences, like extra servings at the hogspit or a round of buns for all. The effigy is then led in mock procession, and ceremonially dunked in a tub of cold well water, an act that elicits cheers, a communal release of both satire and solidarity. Music shifts to a slower reel, and couples draw closer, swaying in time with fiddle's gentle lament. The sky softens to dusk, and lanterns are lit, cores of tallow flickering in the narrowing light. You notice the steam rising from cooling platters, the sweet residue of spiced buns now settling into crumb, the last soot-dark juices pooled beneath the spit. In these final moments you sense a bridge between devotion and delight, a carnival-style revelry that celebrates both community and the human rhythm of feast and fast. The banners settle in the twilight breeze, the dancers slow their steps, and the hog's embers fade to embers of memory. As night deepens, the feast's laughter softens into conversation, and the echo of last chords mingles with the distant toll of the church bell, reminding all that tomorrow returns to fasting, but tonight was buoyed by joy beneath holy banners. You slip into the herbarium at first light, where racks of gently withered sprigs, sage, marjoram, and lemon balm sway like muted banners in a soft draught. The room smells of earth and distance dried moss clinging to stone walls, the faint aroma of distant fields. A heavy wooden table stands at the centre, its surface stained by centuries of tinctures and teas. Here, the legacy of St. Hildegard of Bingen lives on in recipes for digestive health, tucked within her physica like seed packets waiting to germinate. You gather handfuls of barley grains, each kernel smooth and reminiscent of river pebbles, polished by time. The barley is measured by eye, 2 thumbfuls for every cup of water, a proportion Hildegard claimed balanced warmth and moisture in the body. You pour crisp spring water into a copper pot, the liquid surface gleaming like a mirror. Then, with deliberate calm, you stir in the barley, letting the grains disperse in dancing vortices across the pot's tranquil expanse. As the fire beneath the pot sighs to life, you add a sprig of mint pulled from the garden at dawn, its crushed leaves whispering a promise of freshness. Hildegard treasured mint's cooling virtue, believing it soothed both belly and spirit. You press the leaves against the pot's rim, releasing their oils in a fine burst of fragrance that curls upward alongside the rising steam. A dash of cinnamon follows, a nod to the monastic spice trade that Hildegard herself sometimes referenced. Though costly, cinnamon's warming quality was said to coax languid digestive fires into gentle flame. You sprinkle a scant pinch over the barley's burgeoning swell, the powder dissolving in ribbons of scent that swirl like ancient prayers. The barley water simmers, and you pause to brush a fingertip across its rim. A pass of the tongue tastes both grain and root, cool and reassuring. The barley has softened without losing its integrity, its starches lending the liquid a silky body that cradles the herbal notes. You note a faint sweetness, not from sugar, which Hildegard discouraged, but from the barley itself, a testament to the grain's own quiet generosity. While the infusion bubbles, you arrange small clay cups on a worn tray. Each cup carries a simple etching, a cross flanked by a pair of barley stalks, a design that roots the remedy in both faith and natural kinship. You recall Hildegard's words on the interplay of elements that water's purity, barley's substance, and herb's essence combine to restore balance when stomachs rebel against the day's labours. A scribe enters the herbarium, clutching a sheaf of vellum notes. He traces the recipe's original Latin, aqua raresi cum mentha, he reads, his voice a gentle murmur against the pot's hiss. Barley water with mint for the dispelling of humours that darken the belly. You smile at the medieval terminology, humours and dispelling, and imagine Hildegard in her own cloister, mixing remedies between psalms and prayers. When the barley water is ready, you lift the pot's lid and inhale the mingled steam. A breath that tastes of meadow dew, of sunlit granaries, of monastic devotion. You ladle the liquid into each tiny cup, careful not to disturb the grains too much. Each cup receives a final garnish, a single mint leaf floated upon the surface, as delicate as a boat set adrift. Stepping into the refectory, you offer the cups to waiting brothers whose stomachs have known both austerity and abundance. They cradle the cups in both hands, lifting the barley water to their lips. The first sips bring a hush, a collective realignment of posture and breath. You see shoulders relax, brows unfurrow, and senses awaken to the simple harmony of grain, herb, and warmth. You linger at the table's edge, watching the alchemy of this humble remedy. Hildegard's early nutrition science. Her interplay of barley's sustenance, mint's cool touch, and water's clarity reveals wisdom drawn from earth and spirit. In each cup, you taste centuries of monastic inquiry, a gentle testament that healing need not be grandiose, but honest and rooted in nature's own rhythms. As the final cups are drained and the refectory's candles gutter, you return to the herbarium's quiet glow. The copper pot rests empty, its task fulfilled. The mint leaves droop, their oils spent, and the barley grains settle into memory. In the soft hush, you carry with you the gentle lesson of Hildegard's Physica, that within simple barley waters and meticulous renewals lies a profound nourishment of both body and soul. You step through a narrow garden gate into the walled cloister garden, as morning mist still clings to cobblestones. The air here feels softer, alive with the gentle hum of bees moving between plantings laid out in perfect quadrants. Each square foot hosts a single variety: fennel's feathery fronds, sage's puckered leaves, lavender's slender stalks, arranged in geometric harmony that whispers of both divine order and practical study. In the first quadrant, fennel reaches upright like green banners, its celery-like stalks crowned with golden umbels. You crouch beside a stalk and run a fingertip along its ribbed length. A faint anise sweetness rises at your touch. A bee, its body banded and fuzzy, pauses on a fleureted head, collecting pollen in neat, dusty clumps before darting away in a humming salute. You watch its path, a graceful arc between botanical stations, as though the bee itself were a scholar moving from one experiment to the next. Across a low stone border, sage spreads its soft velvet leaves, each one edged in silver fuzz. The herb's scent breeds calm, earthy, slightly peppery, like the hush before vespers. You lean in, inhaling deeply, and feel the garden's heartbeat sync with your own. A monk tends nearby, his brown tunic dusted with soil, as he clips withered blooms to encourage new growth. He offers a small bow and a rueful grin. The bees favor fennel, but sage keeps spirits steady when they swarm. His humor is gentle, an acknowledgement that even in study, nature's caprice demands respect. In the second quadrant, rosemary stands erect, its needle-like leaves a miniaturized conifer scent. A scout of bees searches the blue lavender blossoms, landing with delicate precision. Each blossom yields nectar that will later mingle into the monastery's honey, a golden symphony of flavors that Hildegard herself prized for both taste and therapy. You imagine jars of this honey tasted of thyme and sun, a single spoonful rich enough to soothe coughs or sweeten austere fasting breads. The third quadrant holds marjoram and thyme in companionable rows. Marjoram's leaves curl like unopened scrolls, whispering tales of digestive ease. Thyme's tiny leaves pop with mint-like crispness when pressed. You pinch a sprig of each and rub them between fingertips. The marjoram's soft green yields a sweet warmth, while the thyme crackles with subtle sharpness. A bee buzzes close enough that you catch its shadow on the stones, a reminder that these humble herbs fuel both human comfort and insect industry. In the central quadrant sits the apiary, a cluster of simple hives crafted from hollowed trunks and bound in rushes. Each hive's entrance is a tiny notch, a welcome mat for returning foragers. You draw near as one hive hums to life. Dozens of bees pour forth in a slow river of sound. You stand still, respecting their purpose. A thin thread of wood smoke from a nearby brazier curls around the boxes, a gentle coaxing that persuades the bees to calm without harm. The hives glimmer with wax-laden frames inside, promising harvests of honey as pure as melted sunlight. A novice emerges with a small dipper, drawing a sample of honey into a clay cup. He offers it to you with a nod of gravity. This is no mere sweetener, but the distilled essence of the garden's alchemy. You raise the cup, tilt it back, and let the honey flow, thick, amber, and floral. A taste of rosemary's pine kiss blended with the soft tang of sage and the heady lure of lavender. Around you, the quadrants stand in silent balance. Herbs for healing, bees for pollination, monks for study. The garden is both sanctuary and laboratory, its symmetry reflecting a world ordered yet wild. You walk the path again, pausing at each square to feel the soil's cool pulse and the herbs' quiet promise. The bees, diligent and undeterred, flit across these living experiments, their tiny legs heavy with dusted pollen. As you leave through the same gate, the cloister's bells begin their midday toll, and the mist lifts to reveal sunlit walls. In your hand lingers the memory of herbs and honey, of geometric beds humming with life. The cloister garden, quadrant laid, bee tended, whispers that human curiosity and nature's rhythms conspire in gentle study, offering both nourishment and wonder to those who wander its paths. You step into a bright, airy kitchen in the heart of a modern wellness retreat, where mason jars line open shelves, and sprigs of fresh mint and lavender perch in glass vases like living sculptures. Here, Hildegard of Bingen's grain-centric wisdom finds new life in the hum of blenders and the gentle hiss of stainless steel kettles. The echoes of medieval cloistered study meld effortlessly with today's quest for whole food nourishment. On the butcher block counter, a bowl of ancient grains, hulled barley, spelt berries, and freckled emmer wheat awaits its turn in the grain mill. A retreat cook, her hair tied back in a linen scarf, measures 2 generous spoonfuls into the hopper, recalling Hildegard's notes on balancing cold and damp humours. As the crank turns, the grains yield a pale, fragrant flour. You inhale the fine dust, a sweet, earthy aroma that bridges centuries' farm fields at harvest, and this bright, curated kitchen both alive under the same sun. Nearby, a glass pitcher stands ready for barley water. The cook fills it with filtered spring water, its surface gleaming like a mirror, then stirs in a handful of the freshly milled barley. A sprig of mint picked from the potted herb garden outside floats to the top, its oils unfurling in delicate tendrils. You watch as the barley grains drift and settle, their pale husks translucent against the glass. This simple brew, once a medieval digestive tonic, is now offered at every welcome table, an invitation to nurture body and soul. On a wooden shelf, slender bottles of tinctures and elixirs bear hand-lettered labels: fennel digestive syrup, rosemary clarifying oil, and St. Hildegard spice blend. You pick up the spice mix: cinnamon, clove, lovage, and a secret pinch of pepper blended by local apothecaries. The fragrance is warm and familiar, a comforting nod to spiced buns and ancient remedies whispered in cloister walls. A small spoonful, stirred into warm barley water, transforms the drink into a mug of medieval chai, its steam rising in languid curls. In the corner, a naturopathic practitioner arranges bowls of spelt flour, nut milks, and sprouted lentils on a slate-topped sideboard. She invites guests to build nourishing breakfast bowls: porridge topped with roasted nuts, fresh berries, and a drizzle of honey. You watch as participants wearing casual linen tunics or yoga pants taste the porridge's subtle nuttiness, their eyebrows rising in surprise at how ancient grains can feel at once grounding and uplifting. A soft laugh ripples through the group as one guest brushes a stray grain from her tunic. You'd think each kernel carried a sermon, she quips, voice warm with amusement. Around her, nods acknowledge that Hildegard's teachings carry gravity and grace. Recipes that soothe digestion, bolster immunity, and restore balance, offered without the weight of doctrine, but rich in intention. Between sessions, the call of grain to glass workshops draws curious visitors. Instructors demonstrate how to soak spelt overnight to sprout its dormant sweetness, then grind and knead it into loaves that rise slowly, crust crackling under an artisan's hand. Each loaf, shaped by hand and baked in a wood-fired oven, emerges golden, an edible tapestry of tradition and innovation. You slice a sample, noting how the crumb yields with gentle resilience, tasting of warm fields and human patience. As afternoon light filters through tall windows, you join a circle of guests sipping barley-mint infusions. Conversation drifts from modern stressors to ancient wisdom. How Hildegard's emphasis on simple, whole foods resonates in an age of processed abundance. Someone remarks that if the Abbey kitchens had Instagram, their hashtag might be Drain for the Soul, a modern twist on monastic devotion that earns a round of gentle chuckles. When the day's concluding gong rings, a long, resonant call echoing the monastery bells, you rise with a sense of quiet fulfillment. You carry with you the memory of ancient grains reborn in bright kitchens, of herbal infusions steeped in both science and sanctuary, and of communities forging health from the same elemental roots that Hildegard first tended. In this blend of past and present, you find the essence of modern wellness, nourishment grounded in simplicity, respect for nature's laboratory, and a slow, steady rhythm that honors body, mind, and spirit, just as it did in the hush of those medieval cloisters. And so, our winding path through medieval kitchens, cloistered pantries and grand feasts, draws gently to an end. We began at dawn in a peasant's hut, tasting thin porridge, breaking dense loaves laced with sawdust, and sharing whispers of hunger and hope around a humble fireside. We journeyed with spice caravans across desert sands, felt the weight of peppercorn fortunes, and witnessed a king's fall from a single rotten peach. In silent trenches we uncovered pottery jars teeming with grain husks and insect remnants, and traced the echoes of contamination in town wells where laughter once rang at market fairs. We stood beneath torchlit banners of Edward I banquets, swans reborn with feathers, sugar fortresses gleaming, and every dish a declaration of power, yet shadowed by spoilage's quiet peril. Finally we lingered in monastic gardens and herbariums, stirring barley waters of Hildegard's design, following bees through quadrant beds, and tasting the first stirrings of nutrition science that still nourish our modern tables. Each moment, a shard of pottery under careful brush, a sip of fish-flavored mead by candlelight, a spoonful of honeyed barley water, has been an invitation to breathe deeply, to let the textures of scarcity and ingenuity settle like dust upon your thoughts. Here in these slow revelations, we find not only hardship, but resilience, the human ability to coax warmth from grain, to reattach peacock feathers, to distill wisdom from humble herbs. If tonight's voyage through hunger and ingenuity stirred your imagination, we have many more tales awaiting your quiet curiosity. Perhaps the pious kitchens of medieval nuns, or the hidden alleys where tavern secrets simmered. Our channel is your refuge for slow, immersive histories that soothe as they inform. Rest now. Let the memory of smoky stew and salted cod fade gently into the rhythm of your breath. When you're ready for our next chapter, tap another video, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe and ring the bell so you won't miss our next gentle venture. Share in the comments which moment of medieval ingenuity lingers in your mind and where you're watching from. Thank you for tracing these paths of hunger, humor, and human ingenuity with me this evening. Sleep well until our next quiet exploration.